At some point in life, we start asking different questions. Not just what to do, but why. Not just how to live, but what makes life truly worth living. That's when philosophy stops being theory and becomes a tool. In this video, I've put together 40 incredible philosophy books that go far beyond the classroom. These are works that help you rethink your choices, cope with loss, find purpose, and see the world with greater clarity. Whether you're just starting out or have been on this journey for years, this list is a true guide for reflection, growth, and transformation. So if you're looking for ideas that challenge you, inspire you, and wake something up inside, you're in the right place. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche challenges us to tear down invisible walls. He doesn't just critique traditional morality, he exposes the entire stage of morality as a cultural, historical, and often hypocritical construct. What we call good or evil aren't universal truths, according to Nietzsche. They're interpretations, judgments shaped by interests, resentments, and wills to power disguised as virtue. When someone says, "That's wrong," Nietzsche asks, according to whom? With what intention? Who benefits from this? This is his first hammer blow, to question morality as dogma. For Nietzsche, much of Western morality didn't arise from noble spirit, but from weakness and envy transformed into virtue. He calls this herd morality, a morality designed to domesticate the strong, protect the weak, and make everyone conform in the name of safety. True ethics, for him, isn't about following externally imposed rules. It's about creating values from within. It's the courage to say yes to life, even with all its contradictions and sufferings. Life, for Nietzsche, shouldn't be judged based on some absolute good, but should be affirmed with intensity, with will, with creativity. He criticizes philosophers who tried to build morality on pure reason. For Nietzsche, reason isn't neutral. It's a tool, and often a servant of passions and unconscious forces. That's why he says, every great philosophy is, at heart, a personal confession. Behind every moral system lies a biography, an impulse, perhaps a trauma. He wants us to stop idolizing philosophy as if it were an impartial oracle. The philosopher isn't a priest of truth, but an artist of values. This leads to one of his most provocative concepts, the will to power. Not power as brute domination, but as creative impulse, as vital force seeking expansion, growth, overcoming. Nietzsche sees the authentic human as one who transforms this impulse into art, into thought, into intense life. The opposite is the reactive spirit, one who lives defensively, resentfully, hiding behind moral dogmas. He invites us to be free spirits, but don't confuse this with libertinism or vulgar nihilism. To be free, for Nietzsche, is to be capable of creating your own values without fear, without needing others' approval, without the crutch of inherited morality. This requires philosophical courage. It requires, as he says, having chaos within oneself to give birth to a dancing star. His critique of Christian morality is central. For Nietzsche, Christianity doesn't elevate the human being. It diminishes him. It praises humility, sacrifice, obedience, all virtues that, according to him, arise from the resentment of those who couldn't live fully. The Christ of the Gospels, transformed by the Church into a symbol of redemptive suffering, is seen by Nietzsche as the triumph of the weak over the strong. But this triumph isn't noble. It's a revolt disguised as compassion. In this sense, Beyond Good and Evil is a radical invitation to moral maturity. Nietzsche challenges us to abandon the comfort of ready-made answers and dive into the ambiguity of existence. He wants us to be masters, not in the sense of dominating others, but of mastering ourselves, our reactions, our values. And here's an essential point. Nietzsche doesn't offer a new morality. He doesn't replace an old list of commandments with a new table of virtues. He wants to destroy the structure of morality based on absolutes. He wants to make room for a plurality of perspectives, for ethical experimentation, for a living philosophy, one, made with blood, with flesh, with risk. But why is this important today? Because we're surrounded by disguised moralism. Today's culture, even in its appearance of freedom, is full of little moral inquisitors. Unwritten codes, symbolic lynchings, instant judgments. Nietzsche helps us look at all this with critical eyes. Aren't we just replacing old crosses with new hashtags? Aren't we taking refuge in easy moralism instead of facing the challenge of creating a life with real meaning? He proposes an ethic of affirmation, of creation, an ethic that doesn't fear error, that doesn't seek purity but potency. He writes for those who want to become what they are. A simple phrase, but one that carries a tremendous demand. Becoming who you are implies breaking with masks, with conventions, with imposed identities. Nietzsche also warns us about the danger of nihilism, the feeling that nothing has value, that everything is empty. But nihilism, for him, is a transition, a necessary fire that burns inherited illusions. The danger lies in clinging to the void, in getting lost in skepticism. That's why he seeks to go beyond, not to deny everything, but to affirm something new, a new kind of human, a creator of values. This human is the Overman, later called the Übermensch, not a superhero, nor a fascist ideal, as some have distorted. It's a symbol, a call, an invitation to self-overcoming, to transcend the cultural, moral, and psychological limitations that keep us small. It's the human who dances over the ashes of their own idols. Nietzsche writes with passion, with venom, with poetry. His aphorisms aren't easy, but they're blades. They cut through superficiality, and they force us to face questions that few dare to ask. Do you live your own morality, or just repeat what was taught? Did you choose your values, or just inherit them? Are you a creator or a creature? These questions aren't theoretical. They're existential. They're invitations to transform life, not just thought. If there's a central message in Beyond Good and Evil, it's this: have the courage to think for yourself, even if it leads you to confront everything you've been taught to call sacred. Everything you see, feel, touch, or think, your entire experience of the world, isn't the world itself. It's just a representation. That's Schopenhauer's starting point. He argues that the world exists for us only as it appears to our consciousness. This isn't a metaphor. It's a philosophical claim. The world is my representation. What does this mean practically? Everything you know, from the sound of rain to a loved one's face, exists only as content in your mind. You never access the real world directly. You only experience how it appears to you through perception, intellect, time, and space. We're confined by our own way of knowing. There's no reality behind the curtain. What we see is already an interpretation. This idea isn't entirely original. To Schopenhauer, he builds on Kant, who asserted that space, time, and thought categories are structures of the human mind. But while Kant stopped there, Schopenhauer took it further. He asked, if the world as we know it is just representation, what's behind it? His answer is stark: the will. For Schopenhauer, the will is the deepest reality. It's not rational or controlled. It's blind, irrational, and relentless. It's the drive to live that permeates everything, from natural forces to human desire. This impulse moves planets, causes storms, makes plants grow, animals hunt, and humans love, suffer, desire, and become frustrated. This will has no purpose. There's no divine reason or glorious destiny. The will simply wants to live, to continue, to repeat the cycle. And because of this, suffering is inevitable. To desire is often to lack. Even when we get what we want, boredom sets in, and then a new desire arises. This is the hidden mechanism of existence, Want, suffer, achieve, get bored, and want again. An endless cycle. There's no rest, no true liberation in the world of desires. Thus, for Schopenhauer, life is marked by suffering, not as an exception, but as the rule. This pessimism might seem bleak, but it's deeply clear-eyed. Schopenhauer isn't interested in telling a comforting story about the world. He wants us to look at existence with brutal honesty. Just observe. Every living being struggles, competes, consumes, dies. Nature shows no mercy, and humans, with heightened awareness, suffer even more because we recognize the absurdity of this endless struggle. But not all is lost. Schopenhauer acknowledges moments when we can briefly suspend the will's dominance. This happens mainly in two areas: art and compassion. In true art, especially music, which he sees as the most direct expression of the will, we can escape the tyranny of desire. When we engage with a work of art, lose ourselves in a melody or painting, we momentarily stop desiring. We cease being individuals trapped in lack. We become pure observers, pure contemplation. In that moment, we experience a kind of temporary liberation, almost a glimpse of peace. But the noblest experience for Schopenhauer is compassion. When we recognize another's suffering as real as our own, we break the illusion of ego and separation. In that moment, the will loses its grip. The drive to dominate, compete, and desire gives way to empathy and care. Thus, he sees an ethics of compassion as the only path to true morality. He rejects both duty-based morality, like Kant's, and utility-based morality, like Utilitarianism. For him, the only solid foundation for morality is suffering and our capacity to recognize it. In others, this is what humanizes us, what elevates us. And even though the world remains an endless struggle of the will, these moments of art, compassion, denial of desire, open small windows through which we can breathe, not as escape, but as resistance, as ethical choice in the face of absurdity. Schopenhauer also deeply admires Eastern traditions like Buddhism and Hinduism for recognizing this cycle of suffering and proposing paths to overcome it. He sees asceticism, the effort to deny the will within us, as a real possibility for freedom, not an exalted, heroic freedom, but a quiet one, withdrawn, a kind of unglorious enlightenment. For him, the wise person isn't one who conquers the world, but one who manages, through effort, to silence the will's cries within. This doesn't mean physical death, but a symbolic death of the ego, of craving, of the urge for more. That's why Schopenhauer inspires so many artists, writers, philosophers, and modern thinkers. Because he doesn't offer easy comfort, he offers clarity. He shows the world as it is, and invites us to find dignity even amid suffering. His philosophy is tough, but deeply human, and by understanding that we're merely manifestations of the will, that our reason is a thin layer over an ocean of impulses, we become more humble, more attentive, more compassionate, less deluded by promises of instant happiness. He doesn't want us to become cynical, but mature, to understand that life isn't a gift wrapped to please, but a field of forces where consciousness can indeed flourish, even amid chaos. In the world as will and representation, Schopenhauer offers one of the rawest and paradoxically most liberating visions in Western philosophy. He reminds us of something we avoid facing, that suffering isn't an accident of existence, it's its very nature. But he also shows that by acknowledging it, we're not doomed, we're closer to clarity, and perhaps to freedom. Imagine being the most powerful man in the world, the Emperor of Rome, and yet taking time to write personal notes, reminding yourself to stay humble, to manage pain, loss, criticism, and vanity. That's the essence of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. It's not a book written for others, it's a personal journal. And perhaps that's why it's so honest, brutally honest. Marcus Aurelius didn't write to impress. he wrote to remind himself of what truly matters. This is what makes the book so powerful. It's not theoretical, it's practical. It's living philosophy, applied on the battlefield, in political decisions and personal tragedies. He was a Stoic, and the Stoicism he practiced wasn't about being cold, but about inner strength, emotional discipline, and freedom in the face of the inevitable. The first lesson from Meditations is both simple and challenging. You don't control what happens in the world, but you do control how you respond to it. That's the foundation of Stoicism. External things, fame, wealth, praise, illness, betrayal, are indifferent. They come and go. If you tie your well-being to them, you're surrendering to the world's instability. The only thing truly yours, Marcus says, is your judgment, your mind, your character. Therefore, he insists, if it's within your reason, it's within your control. And if it's outside of that, accept it with serenity. It sounds simple, but consider its depth. How often do you suffer trying to control the uncontrollable? How often do you lose peace, resisting what already is? This Stoic wisdom isn't passive resignation, it's active courage. It's the strength to remain steadfast while everything around you collapses. Marcus Aurelius wasn't a secluded monk. He commanded armies, faced wars, plagues, internal betrayals. Even so, or perhaps because of that, he wrote to remind himself, "Don't let the world make you worse. Be like the rock that the waves crash against without moving." This self-control isn't just about enduring crises, it's also about resisting personal impulses. Marcus writes against vanity, pride, anger. He understood the danger of an inflated ego, especially when wielding power. He says, "You can commit injustice simply by letting it happen." In other words, it's not enough to avoid doing wrong. You must act justly, even if it hurts, even if it brings criticism. One of the most poignant aspects of Meditations is how he confronts mortality. Marcus speaks of death with unsettling calm. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. It's not a threat, it's clarity. He knew everything is transient, the body, titles, affections, and precisely because of that, we should live with presence and awareness. Life doesn't belong to us, it visits us. This awareness of death didn't make him melancholic, but lucid. He saw finitude as a constant reminder to focus, not to waste time on trivialities, not to spend days brooding over offenses or chasing vanities. He wrote, "A man loses more by living 100 years without wisdom than by dying young and wise." And wisdom to him wasn't erudition. It was character. It was acting with reason, justice, courage, and moderation. The 4 Stoic virtues. It was treating others well, even the ungrateful. It was doing good for the sake of good, not for reward. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy, he says. Here's a lesson that transcends centuries. You're not in the world to defeat others, but to conquer yourself, to resist envy, resentment, pride, fear. And this struggle, according to Marcus, is daily. It never ends. That's why he wrote to himself every night, like a warrior cleaning his sword before the next battle. There was another fundamental point: service. Even as emperor, Marcus saw his role as a duty, not a privilege. He reminded himself that power is a moral responsibility, that we're in the world to fulfill a role, and that role should be carried out with dignity, simplicity, and firmness. He said, "What is not good for the hive is not good for the bee." A profound vision of interdependence. This notion of duty linked to the nature of things is central. The Stoic doesn't act based on volatile emotions, but according to the reason that governs the universe. Marcus believed there's a natural order, a cosmic reason, and that our role is to align our actions with it, not to resist what is, but to flow with the logos, with the intelligence of the cosmos. Therefore, when everything seemed chaotic, he asked himself, does this, that happens to me, go against nature, or just against my will? This kind of questioning breaks the illusion of absolute control. It helps accept what can't be changed and act with strength where change is possible. And perhaps the most powerful of Stoic practices is this: to do each day everything within your reach and accept with serenity what escapes your hands. Marcus Aurelius also speaks of time with sharp lucidity. He reminds us that the past doesn't return and the future doesn't belong to us. What exists is the now. And if we waste the present with anxiety, anger, or laziness, we're robbing ourselves. He writes, "Stop behaving as if you had 1,000 years to live. Death is at your door. While you live, while it's possible, be good." Not in a moralistic sense, but in the sense of living in harmony with your rational nature. He insists, man rises above others, not by placing himself above, but by descending to his own duty. True greatness isn't in commanding, it's in serving, in remaining upright, even when no one is watching. The tone of the book is intimate, almost like a whisper of conscience. There are days when he is harsh on himself, acknowledging his impatience, his tendency to sadness, his anger, but he doesn't surrender to it. He uses these emotions as steps. Each failure is a chance to correct himself, to refine himself. There's no pretense in meditations. There's humanity, struggle, and dignity. Reading Marcus Aurelius is like sitting in front of a mirror. Not a mirror that judges, but one that invites responsibility. He doesn't promise happiness. He promises strength. He doesn't talk about avoiding suffering. He talks about facing it with courage, honor, and clarity. And perhaps that's the great message of meditations. Living with virtue is more important than living with comfort, because everything external is uncertain. But the soul, your character, that can be cultivated every day. And that, in the end, is what defines the quality of your life. If you appreciate this kind of content, philosophy applied to life, deep reflections, and books that truly make you think, consider subscribing to the channel. That way, you won't miss any upcoming videos and can continue this journey with us. You're not just who you think you are. The archetypes and the collective unconscious, your name, job, habits, is only a part of the whole. There's a deeper, hidden, and often silent part that influences you without your awareness. Jung calls this the unconscious. In the archetypes and the collective unconscious, he emphasizes that living well isn't about suppressing this darker side, but about integrating it. The book is essentially a call to individuation, the process of becoming a whole human being. This doesn't happen merely by accumulating experiences or as time passes. Individuation requires confronting the unconscious, facing everything you've denied, repressed, or hidden. It's a journey of integration, not denial. Jung starts with a key idea. The ego is the center of consciousness, but not the center of the psyche. It's like an island surrounded by a vast ocean. In that ocean reside symbols, images, instincts, traumas, and forgotten memories, forming both the personal and collective unconscious. The first task is recognizing that the ego can't handle everything. Consciousness alone isn't enough to grasp the complexity of being. Many personal crises arise from the arrogance of thinking we are only what we understand. Jung tells us, you don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This darkness is the shadow, all the parts of yourself you don't want to see. Your fears, impulses, anger, unresolved desires, vanities, they don't disappear just because you ignore them. They accumulate, grow in the depths of the psyche, and eventually demand attention. Unacknowledged, they manifest destructively, sabotaged relationships, impulsive decisions, psychosomatic illnesses, anxiety, nameless anguish. Therefore, confronting the shadow is inevitable. But it's not a violent confrontation. It's not about defeating or eliminating it. It's about listening, understanding, bringing it to light. When you acknowledge your shadow, It loses its power to control you from behind the scenes. You become freer and more whole. This integration process is the path of individuation. It's deep, demanding, and often painful because it involves a symbolic death of the ego. The image we have of ourselves must give way to a broader reality, where light and darkness, reason and instinct, control and chaos coexist. Jung says, "Only the one who risks going too far can possibly find out how far one can go." This leads us to another essential figure, the self. While the ego is the center of consciousness, the self is the center of the entire psyche. It's like an archetype of integrity, the image of who you can become. The self calls, guides, and pushes the soul toward integration. It appears in dreams, myths, and profound experiences of meaning. It's an inner guide, not imposed from outside, but emerging from within. That's why dreams are so important to Jung. They're not mental noise. They're symbolic messages from the unconscious, fragments of psychic truth that escape rational censorship. They speak a different language, a language of symbols, archetypes, images. Learning to listen to them is like deciphering a letter written by your own unconscious. Many of these symbols appear archetypically. Jung identifies universal images that span cultures and eras: the wise old man, the mother, the hero, the child, the serpent, the mandala. These aren't just cultural products. They're expressions of the collective unconscious, a deeper layer of the human psyche shared by all humanity. They emerge to guide, challenge, and transform us. A central point in the book is that denying the unconscious doesn't weaken it. On the contrary, it strengthens it in the shadows. But when you acknowledge it, when you establish a dialogue with it, something extraordinary happens. A new relationship with life emerges. You stop living on autopilot and start living with more depth and truth. But there's a risk. The ego can inflate. Contact with unconscious forces can lead someone to identify with images of power and confuse themselves with the self. Jung calls this ego inflation. The individual believes they've become superior, enlightened, too special. This is dangerous. The path of individuation requires humility. True integration doesn't exalt the ego, it balances it. It places it within a larger, richer, more mysterious context. Jung also highlights the importance of suffering in this process, not as punishment, but as a portal. Often, it's collapse, crisis, or emptiness that forces us to seek something deeper. Suffering breaks down the ego's defenses, disrupts habitual structures, and creates space for something new to emerge. He writes, "The unlived life is a disease of the soul." Here lies one of the book's most touching ideas. You're not here to mechanically adapt to society, but to become who you truly are. Society demands adaptation, masks, roles, but the soul demands truth. Following this inner call often means going against external expectations. Being true to the soul is often an act of courage. What Jung proposes isn't easy, but it's real. He invites us to move beyond superficiality, self-deception, and narrow identifications with persona, status, or social roles. He says, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." This awakening doesn't happen all at once. It's made of encounters with symbols, shadows, memories, pains, and of reconstructions. Finally, the archetypes and the collective unconscious shows us that true freedom isn't about controlling everything, but about deeply knowing oneself. It's about accepting the complexity of the human soul, living with the awareness that we're more than we think, that within us lies a vastness waiting to be recognized, and that the most authentic life is one, where ego and unconscious, reason and instinct, light and shadow don't battle, but collaborate in building a whole human being. You're condemned to be free. This powerful statement by Jean-Paul Sartre in Being and Nothingness carries deep existential weight. For Sartre, freedom isn't a comfortable gift, it's a radical responsibility. There's no predefined essence or purpose. You exist first, and then you define who you are through your actions. There's no predetermined destiny, only choices and their consequences. According to Sartre, humans are projects in the making. We shape ourselves over time through our actions, desires, rejections, and commitments. This process is constant. There's no pause. There's no fixed human nature dictating who you must be. This is what he means by existence precedes essence. Before any labels, man, woman, artist, parent, leader, you are a being that exists. Only afterward do you define yourself through your choices. This is the human condition. Living without a pre-given meaning and being compelled to create one at every step. Sartre introduces two fundamental modes of being in itself and being for itself. Being in itself refers to things, solid, fixed, complete, like a rock or an object. They are what they are. Being for itself refers to consciousness, fluid, restless, incomplete. Humans are being for itself because we're always surpassing ourselves. Never just what we were yesterday. We're always in motion, creating and redefining. This leads to anguish. If nothing determines us, if we're free to the core, then every choice falls on us. We can't blame fate, God, biology, or society, at least not if we're being honest. We're alone in shaping our project. And that's daunting, because each of our actions declares what we consider valuable, setting a model for humanity. When you choose, you're not just choosing for yourself, you're affirming that this is the right path for anyone in a similar situation. That's a heavy burden. Freedom isn't light. It demands courage. Sartre says, we're like gods, but without God. We bear the responsibility of creating meaning, but without any guarantee that we're right. This is freedom in its rawest form. Humans often struggle with this. Enter bad faith, mauvaise foi, another central concept in the work. Bad faith is the lie we tell ourselves to escape responsibility. It's when we say, I am this way, as if it's a natural, unchangeable fact. It's when we act as if we're things, not free consciousnesses. The waiter who overplays his role, the employee hiding behind rules, the lover claiming to be a victim of passion, all are in bad faith. They're trying to be like being in itself, fixed, defined, without freedom. But that's impossible. Freedom is always present, even when we pretend it's not. Bad faith is a kind of self-deception, but it's not unconscious. It's a divided consciousness that knows what it's doing, but chooses to ignore it. It's like closing our eyes to our own freedom, because seeing the truth is scary, because embracing the power to change ourselves is both a burden and an opportunity. This escape from freedom also shows up in our relationships. Sartre spends a good part of being in nothingness analyzing encounters with others. He explains how another's gaze captures us. Suddenly, we stop being free subjects and feel like objects, observed, judged, defined. He illustrates this with the famous image of a man peeking through a keyhole. When he hears footsteps, he realizes he's being watched and feels shame. The other's awareness transforms him. This reveals a central dilemma. Others are both necessary and threatening. We need others to recognize ourselves, but they also reduce us, objectify us. They turn us into characters. Often, we want to become what others expect, seeking acceptance. In doing so, we lose our freedom, becoming appearances, roles, performances. Sartre suggests that relationships are often arenas of conflict, a struggle of consciousnesses. Each person tries to assert their freedom while being threatened by the other's freedom. He calls this hell, and yes, that's where the phrase "hell is other people" comes from. Not because others are evil, but because they confront us with our image, our limits, and the fact that we can't control how we're seen. Ultimately, the work is a deep meditation on nothingness. But this nothingness isn't a destructive void. It's a space for creation. Nothingness is at the heart of consciousness. It's what allows freedom. It's the gap between what we are now and what we can become. It's the emptiness separating fact from possibility. Humans aren't just what they are. They're also what they're no longer and what they haven't yet become. We're gaps, open-ended projects. This demands a life of choices. Sartre doesn't believe in essence, only in lived existence. He states, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." It doesn't matter where you were born, what you've suffered, or what you've inherited. What matters is what you do with it. It's tough, but liberating. There are no excuses, no promises, only action. In this context, authenticity isn't about following a manual. It's about living with awareness of one's freedom. It's about owning one's decisions without hiding behind roles, labels, or traditions. It's about acting even amid uncertainty. It's about creating values, even in the void. In Being and Nothingness, Sartre doesn't offer comfort. He offers clarity. He urges you to stop running from yourself, to stop living as if you're a thing, to acknowledge the anguish and choose, despite it, to accept the weight of freedom and build meaning for your life, even if it doesn't come from outside. Albert Camus opens The Myth of Sisyphus with a striking sentence. There is only one truly serious philosophical question: suicide. He's not being poetic about absurdity. He's going straight to the heart of it. If life has no meaning, then why keep living? This isn't just a theoretical question. It's urgent. And it comes from what Camus calls the absurd, the clash between our deep human desire for clarity, meaning, and order, and a silent, indifferent, chaotic universe. We want life to mean something. We want answers, but the world doesn't answer back. That gap, that tension, is the absurd. But Camus doesn't say life is absurd. He says the relationship between humans and the world is what's absurd. It's like we're in a conversation where only we speak, and the universe stays silent. We shout for meaning, but all we hear is the echo of nothing. So the essential question becomes, what do we do with that absurdity? The first temptation is to run from it. And there are many ways to do that. Literal suicide, philosophical suicide, accepting a forced meaning like God, destiny, or absolute morals, or numbing ourselves with distractions, ideologies, and routine. But to Camus, these are all forms of betrayal, ways of avoiding reality. His answer is different: conscious rebellion. It means recognizing the absurd and choosing to live anyway, without illusions, without false hope. The absurd hero is the one who, in the face of a silent universe, creates meaning through how they live. Not because they find it, but because they choose it. That takes courage. That takes clarity. This is where Camus brings in the myth of Sisyphus, a figure from Greek mythology condemned by the gods to push a massive boulder up a mountain for all eternity, only to watch it roll back down each time. A pointless task, no end, no victory. But Camus offers a radical twist. We must imagine Sisyphus happy. Why? Because Sisyphus, even in the endless repetition of his punishment, is free. He knows his condition. He accepts it. And in that acceptance, he transcends it. There's no false hope, but there's dignity. There's greatness in not giving in choosing to keep pushing the stone, even knowing it will fall. True freedom, Camus says, is born right there, not in expecting salvation, but in choosing your stance toward life. For Camus, the absurd isn't a death sentence. It's an invitation to clarity, to intensity. Once you realize life has no pre-written meaning, you're no longer bound to anyone's script. You're free to live fully, to seek beauty, love, solidarity, even if there's no eternal reward. That's the heart of his ethical view, a life without appeal, but not without value. In fact, it's the lack of promised paradise that makes each moment more precious. The sun, a touch, a piece of music, a laugh, all of it becomes sacred, not because it lasts, but because it doesn't. And it's in that fragility that life becomes most meaningful. Camus rejects both passive nihilism and blind religious fanaticism. He offers a third way: tragic awareness, accepting absurdity as a human condition and affirming life as an artistic and ethical act. To live well, for Camus, is to stay loyal to reality without hiding behind illusions. He also talks about passion, not in the romantic sense, but as a full-hearted commitment to being alive. Absurdity doesn't ask for cold detachment, it asks for intensity. Since there's no ready-made meaning, living becomes an art. Each person must become the sculptor of themselves and of their stone. In the end, the myth of Sisyphus isn't about despair, it's about freedom. It's about not asking more from life than it can give, but also not accepting less. It's about waking up, facing the boulder, and deciding to push it with clarity, with strength, maybe even with a smile. And if you enjoy this kind of content, philosophy applied to real life, deep reflections, and books that actually make you think, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss the next videos and can keep growing with us on this journey. Miyamoto Musashi wasn't just the greatest swordsman of feudal Japan. He was also a philosopher of war, discipline, and inner strategy. The Book of Five Rings is not just a manual on combat, it's a guide to living with awareness, precision, and purpose. Behind every technical teaching, there's a deeper life lesson. The book is divided into 5 chapters, or rings: earth, water, fire, wind, and void. Each element represents a part of the warrior's path, but also a reflection of the human mind facing the world. In the Book of Earth, Musashi teaches the importance of having a solid foundation. Earth represents grounding, stability, and understanding the path. He says a warrior should know not only his own art, but all arts, because true wisdom lies in seeing the common principles across different disciplines. If you understand the core of strategy, you can apply it anywhere in life. A strong foundation isn't built only on technique, but on broad vision, constant observation, and real knowledge. The Book of Water teaches adaptability. Water takes the shape of its container, flows, and fills whatever space it finds. A warrior must be the same, flexible, alert, and able to adjust without losing their essence. Musashi emphasizes that too much rigidity leads to defeat. The true master isn't the one who repeats the same moves, but the one who acts according to what the moment demands. This applies to both battle and life. Act without clinging to form, but with full presence. In the Book of Fire, he focuses on direct confrontation, combat, heat, action. Fire means movement. Musashi explains how a warrior must understand rhythm, energy, and the opponent's intention. Know when to push, when to pull back, when to mislead. But more than that, he insists that battles are not won by strength alone, but by spirit. A calm spirit amid chaos. He writes, "If the heart is calm, even the sword is quiet." Fire isn't just destruction, it's controlled energy. It's courage without haste, clarity in the middle of the fight. The Book of Wind is about looking outward. Wind is the study of other schools, other approaches. Musashi explains that understanding others is part of mastering yourself. He criticizes schools that focus too much on form or beauty rather than effectiveness. He values substance. A refined technique means nothing if it doesn't serve its purpose. This book reminds us not to get caught up in vanity or tradition for tradition's sake, but to always seek what is true, functional, and direct. Finally, the Book of the Void, perhaps the deepest of them all. Here, void doesn't mean emptiness, but silent fullness. It's a state of pure awareness, with no distraction, no doubt, no hesitation. Musashi says, the warrior who reaches this level doesn't think or calculate. He acts with perfect spontaneity. The void is the mind emptied of ego, fear, and urgency. It's the state where body, mind, and environment become one. At this point, technique disappears, only the path remains. Throughout the book, Musashi repeats a key idea: know the way in all things. For him, the art of the sword reflects the art of living. Battle isn't just physical, it's internal. Beating an opponent matters, but harder still is defeating yourself, your pride, your anger, your distraction. A warrior who doesn't master his own mind is always vulnerable, even with the sharpest blade. Musashi lived what he taught. He fought in over 60 duels and was never defeated. But his book doesn't glorify war, it honors self-mastery. He writes about death with calm, about practice with discipline, and about humility as the foundation of true power. He says, "The way is daily practice, attention to detail, a spirit that doesn't waver, and that lesson is universal. You may never pick up a sword, but every day you're in battle, against doubt, against laziness, against illusion." Musashi teaches that true victory comes from clarity, from knowledge that's not just theoretical, but lived, from a mind that sees the whole picture, acts without hesitation, and doesn't cling to ego. The ideal warrior doesn't seek glory. He seeks precision. He seeks alignment. And that's why, even centuries later, the Book of Five Rings remains a map, not just for the battlefield, but for life at its most intense and authentic. Nietzsche doesn't ask what's good or evil. He asks where those ideas come from, who benefits from them, what's behind the way we judge things. On the Genealogy of Morals, he offers a bold critique of the origins of Western morality, showing that what we call virtue may actually come from resentment, fear, and weakness. The book is made up of 3 short but powerful essays in which Nietzsche breaks down traditional views of morality. In the first, he explains 2 types of moral systems: master morality and slave morality. Master morality is rooted in a yes to life. Nobles call good whatever shows strength, beauty, courage, and power. Slave morality, on the other hand, comes from saying no, from resentment toward the powerful. The weak, unable to act, create values that suit them. They call power evil and call obedience, humility, and weakness good. This moral flip, Nietzsche argues, is driven by resentment. The powerless, bitter over their condition, take revenge by creating a system where they are the moral ones, not by choice, but because it's the only option they had. Christian morality, its emphasis on forgiveness, love for others, and humility, is, to Nietzsche, a cover for that resentment. It's not a noble ideal, but a reaction disguised as holiness. In the second essay, Nietzsche looks at the feeling of guilt. He argues that moral conscience didn't come from reason or the soul. It came from violence. Early societies had to tame instinct-driven people, and they used pain to do it, through punishment, shame, and fear. The idea of debt was born. The person owes something to society, the gods, the father figure. That debt turns into guilt. Conscience, then, becomes a way we punish ourselves. Pain that once came from outside now comes from within. But those repressed instincts don't go away. They turn inward. Aggression that can't be released outward turns into guilt, self-loathing, and emotional suffering. Nietzsche calls this the internalization of man. We become our own jailers. The third essay is about asceticism, the rejection of desire, the body, and the will. Nietzsche sees the ascetic ideal, present in religion and many philosophies, as a way to give meaning to suffering. When life is chaotic and painful, this ideal says, your suffering is noble, it makes you pure, it brings you closer to God. But Nietzsche sees danger in that. Asceticism doesn't heal suffering, it just hides it. It turns pain into a moral value, which keeps us from embracing life. The problem isn't suffering itself, Nietzsche says. It's how we deal with it. A healthy culture embraces life in all its contradictions and pain. The ascetic ideal, in contrast, treats life as something to be escaped or corrected. That's nihilism, putting ultimate value in something outside life, in heaven, God, or salvation. Nietzsche wants to flip that idea. He calls for a new kind of morality, not one born out of resentment or denial, but out of strength, creativity, and the courage to affirm life as it is. He doesn't want to destroy morality. He wants to reinvent it. He wants humans to stop being sick animals and start becoming creators of values. That's why his tone is often sharp, confrontational. He knows he's shaking the foundations of what Western culture sees as sacred. But his goal isn't destruction, it's awakening. He wants to break the herd mentality, inherited values, and useless guilt. He reminds us that each person has the power and the responsibility to choose their own ethical principles, as long as they're willing to face the consequences. The genealogy of morals doesn't offer easy answers. It offers discomfort. But from discomfort comes freedom. We can only create new values once we stop being prisoners of the old ones. Nietzsche challenges us to look inward with brutal honesty and, instead of running from life, to learn how to dance with it, even if that means stepping on some old wounds along the way. It all begins with wonder. Aristotle says that wonder, being amazed by the world, is what drives philosophy. Metaphysics is born from this restlessness. Why do things exist? What is being? What causes everything? More than just explaining visible phenomena, Aristotle wants to understand what lies beneath it all. He's searching for the deepest principles of reality. The word metaphysics wasn't even coined by Aristotle. It came later, used to describe the works that came after the physics. But what Aristotle does here is radical. He wants to understand being as being. In other words, what makes something what it is, no matter how it looks or behaves. It's not enough to know how something changes or moves. You have to ask, what is it really? To get there, Aristotle makes a key distinction between substance and accidents. Substance is what a thing is at its core. Accidents are the traits that can change without changing what the thing is. A horse can be white or black, fast or slow. Those are accidental features. But what makes it a horse? Its essence, that substance. This search for essence leads to a central idea, causality. Aristotle argues that nothing exists without a cause, actually, without four causes. Everything has material cause, what it's made of, point formal cause, its shape, design, or blueprint, tant efficient cause, what brings it into being. Final cause, its purpose, its why. The final cause is crucial. Aristotle believes everything in nature has a goal, a direction. Nothing exists by accident. A seed grows to become a tree. Eyes exist to see. Humans exist to seek wisdom. This idea that everything has an internal purpose is called teleology, and it's at the heart of his metaphysics. He sees the universe as a living, ordered system full of meaning. At the center of his thinking is the concept of act and potential. Everything that exists is both what it already is, act, and what it could become, potential. A statue is inside a block of marble as potential. The marble is the raw material, but it only becomes a statue when the sculptor brings it into reality, when potential becomes actual. This dynamic explains how change works. Reality is always moving from potential to act, and that movement isn't random. What drives everything is the desire to reach its most perfect form, in nature, in human life, in the universe. But this raises a big question. What started it all? If everything is moved by something else, there must be a first cause, something that sets everything in motion but isn't itself moved. Aristotle calls this the unmoved mover, the ultimate object of desire and perfection. It doesn't push or command. It attracts. Everything is drawn to it. striving for its perfection. It is pure thought thinking about itself. It's absolute being, eternal, necessary, and the source of order in the universe. In a way, this unmoved mover is Aristotle's version of God. But it's not a personal or moral God like in Christianity. It's a metaphysical reality, the peak of being, pure and complete. For Aristotle, the highest life is one spent in contemplation of this principle. Wisdom is the kind of knowledge pursued for its own sake, not for any practical gain. Human beings fulfill their nature through reason, and that means thinking, searching for what's true and eternal. So Aristotle's metaphysics isn't just abstract theory. It's a worldview. It's a way of understanding not only the universe, but ourselves. Everything, every being, has a built-in purpose. And discovering that purpose is what gives life meaning. His philosophy doesn't reject the physical world. It sheds light on it. It starts from real, everyday experience. But it doesn't stop there. It goes beyond, searching for what stays constant when everything else changes. In doing so, Aristotle builds a bridge between the visible and the invisible, between what is and what can be. Schopenhauer believed the universe isn't driven by rational laws or divine design, but by a blind, irrational force, the will. On the will in nature, he sets out to show that this fundamental force, which he introduced in the world as will and representation, is present in all of nature, from the simplest elements to the complexity of human beings. The will, for Schopenhauer, isn't the conscious will we associate with human intention or desire. It's something much deeper. It's drive, impulse, movement without a clear goal, a constant, restless force that shows up in the sprouting of plants, the instincts of animals, the pull of magnetism, hunger, reproduction, in everything that strives to keep existing. From his perspective, the entire universe is an expression of this never-ending will. In this book, Schopenhauer goes beyond philosophy and leans into science, and that's key. He looks to biology, physics, physiology, and comparative anatomy to find signs that will is at work in everything. He wants to prove that his philosophy isn't just abstract speculation, but is backed by real observations from the natural world. Every organ, every living motion, every material phenomenon is read as a reflection of the same core force, will. He points, for example, to the reproductive drive, a powerful impulse across all living things, as proof of the will in action. Beings don't reproduce out of reason, but out of a blind, instinctive push beyond consciousness. Even organisms with no brain or thought process strive to survive and reproduce. That, to Schopenhauer, is pure will, a blind craving to keep going, with no rational justification. He sees in this a universal structure, what science describes as natural laws, gravity, electricity, metabolism, instinct, he interprets as different faces of the same metaphysical reality. Science can explain the how, but not the why. That's the role of philosophy, to dig deeper and reveal the truth beneath it all. Everything is will. There's nothing behind it, nothing beyond it. This understanding leads to a tragic view of life, because the will isn't chasing some noble purpose. It just wants, and wanting always brings suffering. Desire never ends. When one desire is fulfilled, another immediately takes its place. That endless loop of wanting and frustration defines life. If will is the essence of all things, then suffering is built into existence itself. And this doesn't just apply to humans. It includes nature as a whole. The natural world is a battlefield of forces clashing, consuming, and replacing each other. Animals prey on one another. Plants compete for sunlight. Bodies age and die. The struggle for life is the will in its rawest form. There's no perfect balance, no universal harmony, only conflict and drive. But Schopenhauer isn't just writing to highlight life's pain. He's also searching for a path to wisdom. Recognizing the will in nature isn't just a philosophical insight. It's a wake-up call. When we realize we're trapped in this endless cycle, we can begin to look for freedom. And freedom doesn't come through fighting. It comes through denying the will. He finds inspiration in asceticism, compassion, and Eastern traditions, especially Buddhism. The idea is that by recognizing the will and its insatiable nature, a person can start to step back from it. To reduce craving, let go of attachment, and practice renunciation. Not to reject life, but to rise above suffering. Science alone may not offer that path, but it reflects the reality Schopenhauer describes. When we study nature closely, we see it's not ruled by reason or kindness, but by a force that simply asserts itself. And seeing this invites us to adopt a new kind of ethics, one based on an awareness of universal suffering. There's no ontological hierarchy among beings. All suffer. All are subject to the will. That's why Schopenhauer places so much value on compassion. When we realize others are being pushed around by the same force that moves us, real connection is possible. Their pain isn't separate from ours. It's a continuation of it, and compassion, more than anything, helps us live a life that's less selfish, less ruled by pointless desires. On the Will in Nature is both a philosophical work and a deep commentary on science and its limits. Schopenhauer doesn't reject science. He embraces it as an ally, but he shows that empirical knowledge needs interpretation from a wider view of existence. Science sees the effects, philosophy searches for the cause, and the cause for him is always the same: will. If you like this type of content, philosophy applied to life, deep reflections and books that really make you think, take advantage and subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss any of the next videos and continue this journey with us. Jung believed that symbols speak a language the rational mind alone can't fully understand. In Man and His Symbols, he lays out the foundation of his thinking in a way that's accessible without losing depth. The book serves as a bridge between the unconscious and the conscious mind, between dreams and waking life. At its core is the idea that the mind is more than just the ego. There's a vast, hidden realm that influences our thoughts, behaviors, and emotions, the unconscious. But for Jung, the unconscious isn't just a storage space for forgotten memories. It's creative, dynamic, and symbolic. And its language is imagery. Symbols show up most clearly in dreams, but also in art, myths, fantasies, even in illness. They are spontaneous expressions of the psyche, messages from the unconscious, trying to communicate with the ego. One of the key points of the book is that dreams aren't random or meaningless. They have a compensatory function. They help balance what's missing in our conscious lives. If someone is living too rationally, for example, the unconscious might send emotional, instinctive images. If someone is denying their feelings, the dream brings them back, not as a lecture, but as a symbol. That's why learning to listen to our dreams matters. Jung emphasizes that interpreting symbols isn't about assigning fixed meanings. It's about discovering what the symbol means to the person having the dream. A lion might symbolize strength to one person, but fear to another. The key is understanding the emotional context. The unconscious doesn't speak in clear sentences. It speaks in metaphors. It doesn't explain. It suggests. And working with symbols is a path to self-knowledge. In this process, Jung introduces the idea of archetypes, universal patterns of experience that live in all of us. The shadow, the hero, the mother, the wise old man, the anima and the animus. These figures show up in dreams and myths across all cultures. They're not fixed characters, but symbolic forms that express deep truths about the human soul. Archetypes reveal what's universal in being human, across time and place. The shadow is one of the most important archetypes. It represents everything we reject in ourselves: anger, fear, selfishness, desire, envy. What we repress doesn't disappear, it hides. And the more we deny it, the stronger it becomes in the unconscious. Jung doesn't tell us to destroy the shadow. He tells us to recognize it, to integrate it, because the shadow isn't only destructive, it's also a source of energy, creativity, and truth. Denying it means living half a life. Another essential idea is the encounter with the self, the symbol of the whole psyche. The self is more than the ego. It represents the full inner totality, the balance between conscious and unconscious. It often shows up in dreams as mandalas, circles, or images of harmony and unity. When the self appears, it's a sign that the psyche is seeking integration. This process is called individuation, becoming who you truly are, not by chasing momentary desires, but by realizing the fullness of your soul. Individuation is the path to psychological maturity. It means facing the shadow, exploring dreams, working with archetypes, and finding a balance between reason and intuition, spirit and instinct. It's not an easy path, but it's deeply transformative. Jung warns that modern culture has lost touch with the symbolic. We live in a world dominated by reason, technology, and logic. But that's not enough to give life meaning. Without symbols, the soul gets sick. Many of our modern anxieties, depressions, and crises come from a disconnect between ego and unconscious. Reconnecting with symbols is a way to heal the soul, not with quick fixes, but with deep listening. The book also shows that symbols aren't just a psychological thing, they're everywhere. In fairy tales, religions, art, and ancient traditions. They link the personal and the collective. They connect our individual stories with the shared heritage of humanity. That's why symbols aren't something we analyze from the outside. They're something we experience from within. Man and his symbols is an invitation to open a dialogue with the unconscious, not to control it, but to understand it. Jung teaches that the soul isn't fulfilled by denying the shadow, but by integrating it. And that dreams aren't mental garbage. They're coded messages from the mystery within us. Moral Letters to Lucilius is an intimate guide to how to live. Seneca, already an old man, writes to a younger friend with the intention of passing down his stoic wisdom. But what makes this work so moving is that he doesn't write like someone who has it all figured out. He writes as someone still struggling, still learning, still trying. It's philosophy in raw form, not just ideas to think about, but tools to survive. Seneca starts by reminding Lucilius how short life is. He says, "It's not that we have too little time, it's that we waste so much of it. Time is the most valuable thing we have, and most of us throw it away on distractions, vanity, and trivial concerns." He urges us to cultivate what he calls possession of the soul, to live deliberately with presence and wisdom. Every day matters. Every thought should bring us closer to inner peace. For Seneca, philosophy isn't abstract theory. It's medicine for the soul. It's not meant to impress, but to transform. It gives us strength to endure what we can't control, and clarity to act with virtue in what we can. He teaches that we shouldn't hope for a life without problems, but for a soul that doesn't crumble under them. At the heart of the letters is the idea that virtue alone is enough for happiness. Nothing external, wealth, fame, power, is necessary to live well. These are all indifferent. True good lies in a soul that is self-sufficient. Real freedom is inner freedom. To be free is to not depend on anything outside yourself to be at peace. And that freedom takes self-discipline, self-knowledge, and above all, courage. Seneca warns against excess, anger, and the fear of death. He says, "Death should not be feared because it is simply the end of sensation. There's no pain after death because there's no longer a you to feel it." Facing death calmly is the height of wisdom in Stoicism. Not because one longs for death, but because one has learned not to cling to life with desperation. He also talks often about the value of true friendship. For Seneca, a friend is a mirror of the soul, not someone to fill a void, but someone to share the journey of moral growth. He says, "Love your friend as if they might one day become your enemy, and speak to your enemy as if they might one day become your friend." A piece of advice rooted in balance, caution, and humanity. Another major theme in the letters is the value of simplicity. Even though Seneca was a wealthy man, he praised a life of moderation, austerity, and freedom from unnecessary luxuries. He saw luxury as a trap. The more people cling to comfort, the weaker they become. Real strength comes from being able to let go of what's not essential and finding joy in simplicity. The letters also deal with anger, which Seneca calls a form of temporary madness. When someone loses emotional control, they become a slave to the moment. To a Stoic, anger is never justified, not even when it seems like a fair response. Self-control is the highest form of power, and the strongest response to an insult is calm disregard, not revenge. Seneca also shows how to live in the world without being corrupted by it. He knew what it was like to be close to power. He was an advisor to Emperor Nero. But he also knew the cost. That's why he teaches Lucilius to keep his soul steady in the middle of chaos. The goal isn't to withdraw from the world, but to act within it with awareness, ethics, and loyalty to oneself. One of his most powerful pieces of advice is, choose yourself. Don't live by applause, expectations, or comparison. Stoic philosophy demands authenticity, to stay true to your own reason and principles, even if it costs you comfort, popularity, or even your life. For Seneca, the highest glory isn't to be admired, it's to be whole. Ultimately, Moral Letters to Lucilius is a meditation on what it means to live well in any situation. Not because everything will go right, but because with a trained soul, you can turn any fate into virtue. For Seneca, wisdom isn't about avoiding pain, it's about knowing what to do with it. And that wisdom, built day by day, is the greatest gift a human being can give to themselves. Thomas Hobbes believed that in their natural state, humans aren't peaceful, virtuous, or harmonious. Deep down, we're driven by fear, the instinct to survive, and the desire for power. Without a common power to keep us in check, we'd live in constant insecurity. That's what he called the state of nature, a hypothetical condition with no laws, no government, no authority. And in that state, life is, as he famously put it, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. This raw view of human nature is the foundation of Leviathan. Hobbes doesn't sugarcoat what we are, he sees us realistically. To him, we're all equal in two key ways, our vulnerability and our ambition, and that equality leads to conflict. If two people are equally capable of killing each other, but also equally eager to feel safe, how can they possibly live together without destroying one another? Hobbes's answer is clear and harsh. They can't, not unless there's a higher power strong enough to enforce peace. He calls this power the Leviathan, a symbolic figure representing the sovereign state. This Leviathan is created through a social contract, an agreement where individuals give up some of their natural freedoms in exchange for security and order. This contract isn't made with a specific ruler, but among all individuals who agree on the need for a common authority. Together, they form a kind of artificial person with absolute power to ensure rules are followed. Sovereignty comes from this pact and must be strong, indivisible, and unquestioned. Because if the Leviathan fails, we fall back into chaos. To Hobbes, concepts like justice or injustice don't exist outside the social contract. Right and wrong only come into play when laws exist, when there's a legitimate authority to define them. Before that, anything goes, including violence. So morality isn't natural, it's built for the sake of peace. Law comes before morals, and law is what makes living together possible. This idea can be uncomfortable. At its core, Hobbes is saying that fear, especially the fear of death, is the foundation of civilization. We don't build societies out of love for one another, but to protect ourselves. Absolute freedom isn't really freedom, it's chaos. True freedom, according to Hobbes, exists within the law. It's the ability to live without fear, protected by a sovereign power. So who is this sovereign? It could be a monarch, a council, or any form of government, as long as it holds supreme authority. What matters is that it has the power to judge, punish, and decide. Hobbes didn't believe in separating powers. To him, dividing authority creates room for conflict, and conflict leads to collapse. That's why sovereignty needs to be centralized and absolute. But this doesn't mean Hobbes was defending tyranny for its own sake. The sovereign isn't free to do whatever they want. Their main job is to protect the lives of the people. If they fail to do that, if they allow civil war or chaos, they lose legitimacy. But as long as they maintain peace, they must be obeyed. Because disobedience comes at a high price, a return to the state of nature. Hobbes wrote Leviathan during a chaotic time, civil wars, religious strife, political breakdowns. His philosophy was shaped by that disorder. He believed peace was so precious that it was worth more than any abstract ideal of freedom or virtue. Without peace, nothing else, no culture, no progress, no justice, is possible. Everything depends on order. He also tackled religion in Leviathan. Hobbes saw faith as something that could either support or destroy the social contract. That's why he argued that the state should have authority over religion, to prevent theological disputes from sparking wars. Religious authority, like political authority, should be subject to reason and political order. At its core, Hobbes's philosophy is about turning fear into reason. Our fear of death makes us think, seek protection, and organize into society. And that organization requires a shared power, not an idealized ruler, but a strong, real structure that can contain our natural tendency toward conflict. Leviathan is, above all, a treatise on the limits of freedom and the necessity of authority. Hobbes reminds us that freedom without security isn't freedom, it's danger, and that civilization isn't built on love of goodness, but on the discipline that comes from fearing the consequences of chaos. Sun Tzu didn't just write a military manual. He wrote a guide on strategy, wisdom, and self-mastery. The art of war may start on the battlefield, but its lessons stretch far beyond it, into life, politics, business, and relationships. For Sun Tzu, winning isn't about crushing your opponent. It's about knowing yourself, understanding your enemy, and acting at the right moment. One of the book's most famous lines is, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles." But that kind of knowledge isn't just intellectual. It's intuitive, observant, and patient. Sun Tzu values calculation over courage, the mind over the sword. War should be avoided whenever possible because its cost in human lives, resources, and moral toll is enormous. That's why he says the best victory is one achieved without fighting. Winning without battle is the highest skill, and that only happens with preparation, foresight, and the smart use of the environment. The true strategist shapes the conditions for victory long before any action is taken. He weakens his opponent, spreads confusion, exploits vulnerabilities, and only engages when success is nearly certain. For Sun Tzu, the heart of strategy is flexibility. In war, the most important thing is to constantly adapt to changing situations. Like water adjusting to its surroundings, the wise leader adapts to the moment. He doesn't act on impulse, repeat old methods, or cling to fixed rules. He studies the terrain, the timing, the mood of his people, and only then does he act. And terrain isn't just physical, it's also psychological, emotional, and political. Knowing where you're standing and when to move is everything. Timing is vital. Attack when the enemy is disorganized, when morale is low, when there's chaos within. That's how you win with the least effort. Sun Tzu doesn't glorify bravery for its own sake. He values quiet efficiency. Another recurring lesson is the use of deception. All warfare is based on deception, he says. Pretend to be weak when you're strong. Act distant when you're near. Fooling your enemy disrupts them before the real fight begins. Here, Sun Tzu shows his deeply psychological side. Defeating someone's body is easy. The hard part is defeating their mind. And that takes cunning. But the art of war isn't just about the other side. It's about mastering yourself. A leader who can't control his emotions is destined to fail. Anger leads to recklessness. Pride blinds. Fear paralyzes. Sun Tzu says the ideal commander is calm and self-controlled. He observes before he moves, speaks little, and thinks deeply. He doesn't seek glory. He seeks results. He also emphasizes discipline, both personal and collective. An undisciplined army is already defeated, but discipline starts with example. A leader who's unfair, unstable, or arrogant will lose the loyalty of his troops. But one who leads with clarity, consistency, and fairness earns lasting respect. Leadership, to Sun Tzu, isn't about shouting orders. It's about presence. Not brute force, but moral authority. The book also stresses the power of information. An army without insight is easy prey. Spies, observation, reading the environment, all of it matters. Knowledge is power, and the one who knows more moves smarter. A true strategist is, above all, a sharp reader of the world, of people, situations, and hidden motives. That's why Sun Tzu says a general must be calm, reserved, meticulous, and unreadable. What makes the art of war so timeless is its honesty about the cost of war. War is never a perfect victory. Even winning comes at a price. Lives, resources, energy. That's why the real master of war only fights when there's no other option. And even then, he fights to resolve the conflict with the least possible damage. Honor lies in strategy, not destruction. In the end, Sun Tzu teaches us that real power isn't about controlling others, but about controlling ourselves in the face of challenge. War, as a metaphor, is the place where our strengths and weaknesses are exposed. And victory, ultimately, is a matter of awareness, seeing clearly, acting wisely, and never wasting energy on battles that don't need to be fought. Antoine Roquentin is alone, not by accident, but by condition. He walks through the streets, watches people, sits in cafes, visits the library, and everything feels out of place. Or rather, everything just is, raw, without purpose or meaning. And in that ordinary yet strangely empty setting, the nausea appears. A vague sense of unease, without a clear cause, that reveals something much deeper, the absurdity of existence. In Nausea, Sartre doesn't build a theoretical philosophy, he embodies it in a character. Roquentin reflects the modern human who's lost their illusions and is left staring at the bare reality of life. He looks at a tree branch and realizes it simply exists. There's no reason, no goal. Existence just is. And that realization is what makes him feel nauseous. But the nausea isn't just physical, it's existential. It's the clash between our human need for meaning and a world that has none on its own. Everything is just there, without a why. The ground, the objects, the body, time, they all escape logic, labels, and language. Reality is overwhelming, and we, used to explaining everything with words, suddenly find ourselves without tools. Sartre quietly challenges idealism, rationalism, and humanism, all the worldviews that try to place humans at the center of meaning. For him, there is no essence before existence. A person isn't born with a purpose, an identity, or a true nature. We exist first, and only then define who we are. But this freedom brings anxiety, because now there are no excuses, no ready-made templates. Roquentin begins to realize that even the words we use to name the world are just ways of hiding this absurdity. Calling something a chair doesn't explain its brutal existence. It's a convenient label, but it's also a lie. And when that language starts to fall apart, when our cultural masks drop, existence appears as a nameless weight. And that's when nausea hits. But this isn't a call to hopelessness. Sartre isn't saying life is worthless. He's saying life has no built-in meaning, and it's up to us to create it. That's the heart of existentialism. If there's no given essence, then we are radically free. And that kind of freedom isn't a gift. It's a burden. Because it means full responsibility. Every choice we make defines who we are, and also suggests what we believe a human should be. Roquentin feels stuck in this. He's disgusted by social routines, roles, and people's fake confidence. Everything feels staged, fake. Even his own past, once a comfort, starts to unravel. Memories become unreal. Time breaks apart. Life is no longer a story, just a series of absurd moments. But then, something shifts. While listening to a jazz song at a bar, Roquentin catches a glimpse of a different way to exist, through art. Art doesn't need to justify itself. It's pure creation, existing for its own sake. And in that moment of music, he sees an alternative to nausea, the possibility of creating meaning, even without any absolute foundation. That small revelation doesn't erase the crisis, but it points to a way out. Roquentin begins to consider writing a novel, not to teach a moral lesson, but to give shape to his experience of the absurd. Not to escape nausea, but to turn it into expression. That's the turning point. Accepting the emptiness, but refusing to be paralyzed by it. Choosing to create, even when nothing is guaranteed. Sartre shows us that human freedom is inseparable from anxiety. There's no destiny, no essence, no God telling us who we're supposed to be. We're thrown into the world, and from there, it's up to us to invent ourselves. Roquentin starts out drifting and ends by preparing to act. He's not saved by a truth, he's moved by a decision. Nausea forces us to look at life without filters, no myths, but it also invites us to see that because nothing is predetermined, everything is possible. And that freedom, as uncomfortable as it may be, is what makes us human. Not because it guarantees comfort, but because it calls us to take full responsibility for our own existence. If you enjoy this kind of content, life-applied philosophy, deep reflections, and books that really make you think, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any of our upcoming videos, and you can keep exploring this journey with us. What's in our control and what isn't? That's the guiding question of Epictetus throughout the Enchiridion. His philosophy is direct, practical, and uncompromising. There's no room for illusions. If you want to live well, you need to learn the difference between what depends on your will and what's in the hands of fate. For the Stoic, wisdom lies exactly in this. Calmly accepting what you can't change and acting with excellence on what you can. Epictetus wasn't a distant philosopher locked in theory. He was a former slave, someone who knew pain, limitation, and rejection firsthand. That's why his stoicism isn't abstract. It's made for real life. In the Enchiridion, every lesson is a reminder. You don't suffer because of what happens, but because of the way you judge what happens. It's not death that hurts you, it's the fear of it. It's not the insult that wounds you, it's the meaning you give it. The first and most important teaching in the book is this. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. What's up to us? Our thoughts, desires, impulses, and choices. What's not? Our body, health, other people's opinions, external events. Trying to control the uncontrollable is a guaranteed path to frustration, but accepting what fate brings with dignity, that's true inner freedom. This freedom isn't reckless or cold indifference. It's self-mastery. It's the ability to stay centered even when the world feels like it's falling apart. Epictetus urges us to train our soul like an athlete trains their body, with effort, repetition, and discipline. It's not about suppressing emotions, but about not being ruled by them. When anger rises, when sadness hits, the Stoic doesn't pretend they're not there. They step back and ask, is this helpful? Is this under my control? Epictetus deeply values reason, but not in a cold, detached way. For him, reason connects us to the natural order of the universe, the logos. Living virtuously means living in harmony with that order. If you fulfill your role well, whatever it may be, you are free. A virtuous slave, he says, can be freer than a greedy emperor. What makes the Enchiridion so powerful is its simplicity. Epictetus teaches that you shouldn't cling to things as if they're truly yours. He says, don't say, I lost it. Say, I gave it back. Your child died. They were returned. Your wife passed. She was returned. They took your property. It was never truly yours. Everything we have is on loan. Once we understand that, loss becomes easier to accept. It's not giving up. It's gaining clarity. He insists, don't wish for things to happen your way. Wish for them to happen as they do. That's the heart of Stoicism. Happiness doesn't come from bending the world to fit your expectations, but from aligning your mind to reality. That doesn't mean giving up on action. It makes your actions stronger. Because when you act without clinging to outcomes, focused only on doing what's right, you free yourself from fear, anxiety, and ego. Another key teaching is how to deal with other people. Epictetus reminds us that no one can truly offend us. It's our interpretation that gives their words power. If someone calls you an idiot and you don't believe it, why be upset? Other people's opinions only hurt us if we let them. Living for those opinions is like living in chains. Wisdom, for Epictetus, shows up in everyday life. It's in every decision, every small reaction. It's in how you respond to insults, loss, illness, and setbacks. The true Stoic doesn't chase grand heroism. They aim for inner consistency, to act according to your principles no matter what's going on around you. There's also a quiet but powerful spirituality in his words. Epictetus talks about God, or the gods, as forces that govern the universe with order and fairness. If you trust that order, if you believe nothing happens by accident, then you can face life's challenges with a calm heart. There's no chaos, only a purpose we might not yet see. And your part is to play your role with courage and peace. At its core, the Enchiridion is a call to take responsibility. No one can take away your power to choose how you respond to life. And that choice is everything. True freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's wanting what's right, even when it's hard. Zhuangzi doesn't teach you how to control the world. He teaches you how not to be controlled by it. In his book, laughter, paradox, and poetry blend with deep philosophy. He doesn't offer a logical system, but a way of seeing the world that challenges your certainties and invites you into freedom. Zhuangzi doesn't want you to understand the Tao with your mind. He wants you to dance with it. Everything in his philosophy revolves around the Tao, the way, this invisible, undefinable force that flows through all things. You can't explain the Tao because trying to explain it is already missing it. The Tao can't be grasped or named. It's like water. It flows, adapts, finds its way. And the wise person, Zhuangzi says, is like water too, flexible, light, and unattached. They don't resist the world. They move with it. Zhuangzi pushes back against rigid logic, fixed concepts, and man-made divisions like right and wrong, useful and useless, life and death. He says, what's good for one person might be bad for another. What's useful today might be useless tomorrow. What feels real could be just a dream. But this isn't lazy relativism. It's a call to humility. Reality is too vast to fit into our neat little categories. One of his most famous passages is the butterfly dream. Zhuangzi dreams he's a butterfly, carefree and happy. When he wakes up, he wonders, am I Zhuangzi who dreamed of being a butterfly, or a butterfly now dreaming of being Zhuangzi? It's not just a clever thought experiment. It's a reminder that identity is fluid and clinging to a fixed self is an illusion. Zhuangzi invites us to let go of control, to stop obsessing over being right, winning, or standing out. He values spontaneity, that effortless action that arises when you're in tune with the moment. He calls it Wu Wei, non-doing. It doesn't mean doing nothing. It means acting without force, without ego, without strain, like bamboo that bends with the wind but doesn't break. To him, freedom doesn't come from shaping the world to fit your desires. It comes from not being a slave to your desires. If you depend on recognition, success, or results, you're chained. But the truly free person is like a fish in water. They're not afraid, not scheming, not chasing approval. They just swim. And that's enough. Zhuangzi also pokes fun at society's values. He tells a story about a man who envies the legs of a wild goose and tries to stretch the legs of a domestic duck, and the duck dies. It's a critique of trying to force everything and everyone into a mold. Every being has its own way. Forcing a pattern kills the uniqueness of life. He talks about death with surprising lightness. When his wife dies, he sings. When a friend asks why he's not mourning, Zhuangzi says, "She came from nothing, passed through life, and returned to nothing. Why grieve?" For him, life and death are just transformations of the Tao. Not tragedies, just changes in form. Dying is like autumn turning into winter. This isn't coldness, it's deep wisdom. It's a way of seeing the world without clinging, accepting change without being stuck in what used to be, living the present moment without needing it to last, and most of all, not taking yourself too seriously. Zhuangzi also criticizes so-called wise men who are proud of their knowledge. For him, the true sage forgets themselves. They dissolve into the flow of life. They don't cling to titles, answers, or ambition. He says, when you're outside the water, you sing one song. When you're inside, you sing another. The one who knows the right moment sings the right song. It's the wisdom of adapting, of letting go. The Book of Zhuangzi is an invitation to detachment, but also to joy. He doesn't want you to abandon the world, just not be possessed by it. Walk among others without losing yourself. Learn to laugh, even at the absurd. See beauty, even in what seems useless. And instead of trying to control life, learn to flow with it. Viktor Frankl survived the unimaginable. He lived through Nazi concentration camps, saw family members die, and endured hunger, cold, and humiliation. Yet when he came out of it all, he didn't write a book about despair. He wrote about meaning. In Man's Search for Meaning, he says suffering only becomes unbearable when it lacks purpose. And even in the worst situations, a person can still choose their attitude. Frankl draws from his time in Auschwitz and Dachau. With stark honesty, he describes the losses, the punishments, the dehumanization. But the book isn't meant to be a historical account. It's an existential reflection. He noticed that some prisoners, despite the horror, held on to their dignity. They helped others. They sang silently to themselves. Meanwhile, others, even those who were physically strong, gave up quickly. The difference wasn't in the body, but in the soul, in the meaning each person gave to their existence. Frankl developed logotherapy, a form of therapy based on the search for meaning. He believed that the core drive in human beings isn't pleasure, as Freud said, or power, as Adler claimed, but meaning. When life has a why, we can endure almost any how. That idea, inspired by Nietzsche, is at the heart of his work. Life never loses its value, even when it loses its comfort. But meaning isn't handed to us. It's something we discover, and it can show up in the simplest or even the most tragic of moments. It might come through the memory of a loved one, an act of bravery, a small moment of kindness, a duty fulfilled, or pain faced with dignity. Meaning is personal, unique, and non-transferable. What gives your life meaning might not matter to anyone else, and that's okay. Frankl observed that when prisoners lost their sense of meaning, they often gave up on life. They lay down and never got back up. On the other hand, those who found a reason to live, even something as fragile as the hope of seeing someone again or writing a book, kept going despite having no guarantees. That inner choice was more powerful than any fence or guard. One of the strongest lessons in the book is that our last human freedom is the ability to choose our attitude, no matter the circumstances. Even when everything is stripped from us, food, clothes, identity, we can still choose how we respond. We can choose bitterness and collapse, or inner resistance and grace. We can decide whether or not we will let ourselves be destroyed from within. Frankl doesn't romanticize suffering. He's clear, suffering is not necessary to find meaning, but when suffering is unavoidable, we can transform it. It's not about seeking out pain, but about not wasting it. It's about making pain fertile, turning it into growth, compassion, and strength. He describes 3 main ways we find meaning: through action, doing something meaningful; through experience, loving someone, appreciating beauty; and through suffering, when we face it with courage and integrity. In every case, what matters most is how we respond to life. Meaning isn't a luxury for the privileged. It's the foundation of existence. Another powerful idea in the book is Frankl's warning against modern-day nihilism. The belief that nothing matters, that everything is relative, that there are no real values. He calls this the existential vacuum, a feeling of emptiness, apathy, and disconnection. He saw many people living busy lives but feeling hollow inside. They did a lot, but didn't know why. And he warned that this emptiness can lead to depression, boredom, violence, even suicide. Instead of trying to erase pain or avoid suffering, Frankl encourages us to face them with purpose. Life is a question, and each of us is responsible for answering it through how we live. We shouldn't just ask, what can I expect from life? But rather, what does life expect from me? That shift takes us out of our ego and places us in relationship with the world, with a call to respond in a personal, responsible, and meaningful way. Frankl teaches that we are more than what happens to us. We are what we choose to do with what happens to us. Fulfillment doesn't come from chasing happiness. It comes from committing to a cause that matters, to someone we love, or to the courage to suffer with dignity. Life isn't short, we just waste it. That's the blunt truth Seneca opens with in this essay. He writes to Paulinus, but really, he's speaking to all of us. Time is the most precious thing we have, and almost no one treats it with the respect it deserves. It's not death that betrays us. It's the constant distraction with things that don't matter. Seneca points out that many people live as if they'll never die. They put off their dreams, ignore the present, chase status, wealth, and busyness, always occupied, but never truly living. It's a cruel paradox. They're always too busy, yet they misuse every hour. The problem isn't how much life we get, but how little attention we give to the life we have. He notes that people are terrified of losing money, but they give away their time without a second thought. They save for the future, but don't save their hours. And when they finally realize it, time has been spent on useless things, pleasing others, chasing power, feeding egos. And when death comes near, they suddenly see that they never really lived at all. To Seneca, life isn't just about biological survival. To live is to be present, to be aware, to be in line with your rational nature. And that requires reflection, courage, and discipline. Living well means using your time for what really matters, and that has nothing to do with what the world celebrates. and everything to do with what strengthens the soul. This essay is a warning against empty busyness. Seneca uses irony to describe those who are always rushing, tangled in other people's concerns, constantly doing things that seem important, but bring no peace. Being busy isn't the same as being alive, and in true stoic fashion, he reminds us that peace isn't something you buy, it's something you earn. One of the most beautiful points in the text is when he says the life of a wise person is long, no matter how many years it lasts. Because the wise live each moment fully. They're not waiting for retirement or a future vacation or some sign from the universe. They live now. Each day is complete because they're fully present. Their time stretches because they don't waste. Seneca also says that philosophy is the best use of time, not as an academic exercise, but as a way of living. To philosophize for him is to learn how to die, meaning to live with full awareness of our mortality. It's to examine life, search for inner truth, and cultivate virtues like reason, courage, and justice. The one who practices philosophy is always alive, even in the face of death. He criticizes those who treat reflection as a luxury, something to do only after everything else is handled. But for Seneca, the time to think is now, in the middle of the chaos, between daily tasks, during ordinary life. Waiting for perfect peace before you reflect is like waiting for the ocean to be calm before learning how to sail. There's also a powerful lesson about the past and the future. Seneca says many people torment themselves over the past and stress about the future, and by doing that, they lose the present. The wise person, he says, embraces the past as well lived and looks toward the future with calm. They live now with purpose. And that is true freedom, not being a slave to what was or what might be. Toward the end of the essay, Seneca makes a plea. Stop chasing time. Start using it. Time only feels short to those who waste it. For someone who lives wisely, a single day can be full. He writes, life is long enough to accomplish great things, if we use it well. The secret isn't more time, it's less waste. The entire essay is a call to be present, to get off autopilot, to stop filling our calendars and start filling our lives, to stop merely surviving and start actually living. And to live, Seneca says, is to make time your ally, not your enemy. It's to honor each moment as something that won't come again. Because in the end, it won't be how long you lived that matters, but how deeply you lived it did. Nietzsche wrote the Antichrist as a direct and forceful attack, not against the historical Jesus, but against what institutional Christianity had become. In his view, organized religion, especially traditional Christian morality, represents a complete inversion of life-affirming values. What is weak, sick, and resentful is praised. What is strong, creative, and life-affirming is condemned. For Nietzsche, that's not morality. It's decay disguised as virtue. Right from the opening pages, he declares, "We are opposed to everything that today is called Christianity." His target isn't love, compassion, or forgiveness themselves, but how those values have been twisted to diminish humanity, deny life, and suppress individuality and instinct. Christianity, he argues, became a slave morality built on the resentment of the weak toward the strong. Nietzsche sees Christianity as a form of active nihilism, a deliberate effort to erase the value of earthly life in favor of a fictional afterlife. The Christian, in his view, despises the body, passion, pleasure, and the present. They chase salvation, heaven, obedience, but in doing so, they deny everything that makes life vibrant. Instead of strengthening people, Christianity weakens them. Instead of liberating, it cages. He contrasts this with the figure of Jesus, not the mythologized Christ, but the real man. To Nietzsche, Jesus was not the founder of a church or a system of morals. He was a free spirit, a peaceful rebel who lived love as a form of affirmation, not obligation. Nietzsche suggests that Jesus was betrayed by his own followers, who institutionalized his message and built a religion based on guilt, sacrifice, and rigid dogma. Paul, in particular, is harshly criticized. Nietzsche sees him as the true architect of institutional Christianity. Paul, he says, wasn't seeking truth, he was seeking power. He turned Jesus' death into a fear-based salvation system centered on sin. He invented the idea of the Redeemer to justify the Church's authority. And with that, he laid the foundation for centuries of spiritual repression. Nietzsche also attacks the concept of sin. To him, it's a psychological weapon. People are taught they're flawed by nature, unworthy, in constant need of forgiveness. That message makes people shrink, ashamed of themselves, repressing their vital instincts. Christian morality doesn't elevate, it tames, and the cost of that taming is the very vitality of the soul. The Antichrist isn't a shallow call to atheism. Nietzsche isn't just denying God, he's proposing a new way to say yes to life. He believes we must move beyond Christian nihilism and create new values that embrace life as it truly is. Tragic, imperfect, instinctual, beautiful. He envisions a human being who says yes to life, even with all its chaos and pain, instead of hiding behind comforting dogmas. This critique extends to European culture as a whole. Nietzsche argues that Christianity corrupted not only religion, but also philosophy, politics, and science. Even non-believers, he says, still think like Christians, clinging to ideas of absolute truth, universal morality, and eternal souls. He calls for a revaluation of all values, to flip that logic and create a new ethic rooted in creative power, health, and this world. He celebrates Dionysian values, the body, instinct, art, the transformation of pain into beauty. In contrast, he attacks the ascetic ideal that preaches denial, renunciation, and glorifies suffering as a path to redemption. Nietzsche wants the opposite, a philosophy that affirms life in all its raw, messy complexity. He writes, "What is good? All that enhances the feeling of power in humans. Not power over others, but inner strength and vitality." The Antichrist is a manifesto of rupture. It doesn't offer comfort, it offers clarity. Nietzsche wants to shake people out of moral sleep. He wants humanity to stop crawling and stand upright again, with courage and independence. His proposal is risky because it demands maturity. There are no guarantees, no heaven, no redemption, just the challenge of being free. And for him, that freedom begins the moment we dare to think for ourselves and love life without apology. Aristotle begins with a simple but powerful question. What is the ultimate goal of human life? What are we really chasing, no matter what we do? His answer is happiness, but not in the fleeting sense of pleasure. For him, true happiness, or eudaimonia, is about living a good, meaningful life. It's not an emotion. It's the activity of the soul in line with virtue. To Aristotle, happiness isn't something you stumble upon. It takes work. It's something you build through choices, discipline, and conscious effort. Human beings have a specific nature, and that nature is tied to reason. So to live well is to live in harmony with reason, developing the virtues that make us fully human. This means practicing, building habits, and reflecting regularly. He divides virtue into two main types: ethical virtues, like courage, generosity, and self-control, and intellectual virtues, like wisdom and good judgment. Ethical virtues are shaped through habit. You become just by acting justly, brave by facing fear. We aren't born virtuous, we become virtuous. For Aristotle, living a moral life means constantly shaping your character. One of his key ideas is the doctrine of the mean. Virtue lies between two extremes. Courage, for example, is the balance between cowardice, too little, and recklessness, too much. Generosity falls between stinginess and wastefulness. This middle isn't mediocrity, it's balance. And balance looks different for each person and situation. That's why virtue requires phronesis, practical wisdom, to figure out what's right in real life. Aristotle acknowledges that pleasure is part of a happy life, but only when it fits with reason. Pleasure alone isn't the goal. It naturally follows from meaningful action, like good health follows a well-cared-for body. True pleasure comes from doing something worthwhile, like thinking deeply, acting fairly, or living with integrity. Friendship also plays a key role. Aristotle says no one can be truly happy alone. The best kind of friendship is based on mutual goodness, not just usefulness or fun. It's a relationship where both people genuinely want what's best for each other and help each other grow. Real friends act like moral mirrors. They keep you honest, grounded, and on the right path. Friendship, for Aristotle, isn't a bonus. It's a core part of ethical living. He also recognizes that external things matter, like health, money, education, and stability. Virtue is the foundation of happiness, but it needs a basic level of material well-being to thrive. You can't practice generosity if you're starving. So Aristotle's ethics are realistic, rooted in character, but grounded in the real world. Toward the end of the book, Aristotle talks about the highest kind of life, the contemplative life, one focused on pure reason and philosophical thinking. To him, this is the most godlike activity, constant, self-sufficient, and free. The highest form of happiness comes from seeking truth and contemplating what's eternal. Most people won't live entirely this way, but Aristotle sees it as the ideal direction for the human soul. The Nicomachean ethics also makes it clear that moral living isn't about rigid rules. It's an ongoing process. No one's born ready. Moral excellence is a daily effort, shaping your desires, learning from mistakes, and building your inner self. Freedom, for Aristotle, isn't doing whatever you want. It's wanting what is truly good and acting on it. Ethics isn't the opposite of freedom. It's freedom at its best. In the end, Aristotle invites us to see life as an art form. Living well is like playing an instrument or writing a poem. It takes skill, feeling, and practice. Virtue is the harmony of reason, emotion, and action. And happiness isn't a gift from the gods. It's a human achievement, built day by day through deliberate choices, corrected mistakes, and disciplined passions. Kant set out to answer one essential question. What makes an action truly moral? Not what's useful, or what brings pleasure, or what leads to good results, but what is right in and of itself. In Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals, he builds an ethical system that doesn't rely on consequences, but on universal principles rooted in reason. For him, the heart of morality lies in intention and rational obligation, not in outcomes. The first thing Kant argues is that nothing is good without limits except a good will. Talent, courage, intelligence, even happiness. All of these can be used for bad purposes if they aren't guided by a good will. So what defines a good will? Acting out of duty, not just according to duty. In other words, doing the right thing because it's right, not out of fear, self-interest, or emotional impulse. To explain this, Kant distinguishes between actions that are done in accordance with duty and actions done from duty. For example, a shopkeeper who doesn't cheat his customers may just be protecting his reputation. The action is outwardly correct, but the motivation is selfish. On the other hand, someone who does the right thing even when it brings discomfort or loss, that person acts from duty. And only that kind of motivation, Kant says, has true moral worth. Reason, according to Kant, is the foundation of morality. As rational beings, humans are capable of recognizing moral laws and choosing to follow them out of respect for reason, not out of convenience. This ability to govern ourselves, To act based on principles instead of instinct is what gives humans their dignity. Morality, then, doesn't come from outside us. It doesn't depend on religion, tradition, or authority. It comes from the autonomy of practical reason. And this is where his most famous concept appears: the categorical imperative. It's the form that reason takes when it lays down moral laws. It comes in several versions, but the most well-known is this: act only according to that maxim whereby you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. That means, before you act, ask yourself whether the rule you're following could be applied by everyone. If the answer is yes, and you're okay with that, then your action is moral. This idea of universalization is a rational test. If you lie, for example, and you want it to be okay for everyone to lie when it's convenient, then the concept of truth breaks down. Lying only works because people generally expect honesty, so a morality built on lies destroys itself. Reason exposes the contradiction. Another version of the categorical imperative is just as powerful. Act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of another, always as an end and never as a means only. This establishes a foundation of absolute respect for human dignity. No rational being should be used as a tool for someone else's goals, not for pleasure, not for profit, not for social convenience. Every person must be treated as an end in themselves, with unconditional value. This moral vision is demanding. It doesn't allow for exceptions or moral shortcuts, but it's also deeply empowering. It says that all human beings, no matter their background or beliefs, have access to the moral law within themselves and can choose freely to live by it. Ethics, for Kant, isn't a list of external commandments. It's the expression of rational freedom, guided by principles that anyone could live by. Kant also rejects the idea that morality should be based on emotions like empathy or compassion. These can support moral behavior, but they aren't the foundation. Feelings are inconsistent. They vary from person to person and moment to moment. Reason, when properly used, is stable, universal, and impartial. That's what gives Kant's ethics strength, even in tough situations. At its core, groundwork of the metaphysics of morals is an attempt to ground morality in something beyond chance, desire, or power. It's an ethics of freedom and responsibility. For Kant, to be moral is to understand that our actions aren't just about us. They're statements about how the world should be. Every choice is a declaration of a universal value. William James understood that not everything that matters can be proven. In The Will to Believe, he argues that in certain deeply human situations, especially when we deal with questions like God, freedom, or the meaning of life, pure reason isn't enough. Sometimes, the decision to believe has to come before certainty, and that's not weakness, it's a valid act of will. James was responding directly to a common critique of his time, especially from thinkers like W.K. Clifford, who insisted that we should only believe what can be proven through reason and evidence. Clifford believed that faith without proof was morally wrong. James disagreed. He respected reason but pointed out that sometimes staying neutral isn't actually an option. In those cases, belief might not only be acceptable, it might be necessary. He described these moments as genuine options, choices that are live, forced, and momentous. A live option is one that feels real to you. A forced option is one you can't avoid. A momentous option has significant consequences. In moments like these, deciding whether to trust someone, to love someone, to dedicate your life to a cause, waiting for absolute proof means missing the opportunity itself. James is saying that some risks can only be understood by living them. You can't fall in love only once you're guaranteed the other person loves you back. You don't commit to a life project with a guarantee of success. In the most meaningful parts of life, you have to act before you know. That willingness to move forward without guarantees is what he calls the will to believe. This kind of belief isn't naive. It's not about believing anything blindly. James clearly distinguishes between irrational, emotional belief and a kind of faith that is rationally allowed, even in the absence of complete proof. He's interested in beliefs that make a real difference in our lives, that shape our decisions and actions. Faith, in this sense, is a way of living, not just an opinion. Here, James's pragmatism plays a key role. He doesn't only ask whether a belief is abstractly true. He asks, what practical value does it have? What does it do for your life? If a belief makes you more whole, more engaged, more committed to goodness, then it has a kind of value that goes beyond cold logic. For James, truth is tied closely to lived experience. He also argues that sometimes belief is actually a condition for discovering truth. One example is trust between people. If you wait for absolute proof before trusting someone, you probably never will. Trust becomes real only when it's given before the proof comes. The same goes for religious faith or deep personal commitments. They require a leap before certainty. James rejects both extreme skepticism and rigid dogmatism. He offers a middle path, a living faith, one that's rationally grounded but open to uncertainty. And that openness to uncertainty isn't weakness, it's a form of courage. Because to live authentically, James says, you have to accept that some truths only reveal themselves after you commit to them. Another key point, James isn't trying to prove that God exists. He simply argues that believing in God can be a legitimate choice, even without scientific proof. For those who genuinely experience the presence of God or feel a deep spiritual reality, faith is a living response, not just a guess. Denying that possibility in the name of pure reason, for James, oversimplifies human life. His approach is deeply human, acknowledging the limits of reason without discarding it, honoring subjective experience without falling into self-deception, and above all, affirming that real living requires bold choices, often made before we're certain, guided by intuition, hope, and the human need for meaning. The will to believe is ultimately the will to live fully, even without guarantees. It's the choice to follow what can give life meaning, even if the outcome isn't clear. It's a call to inner freedom, personal responsibility, and the courage to say yes where reason alone is silent. The Tao can't be named. Lao Tzu begins his book by saying, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao." That line isn't meant to be a riddle. It's an invitation to silence, to see beyond words. The Tao Te Ching isn't a logical manual, but a gentle guide. It teaches not by declaring truths, but by suggesting paths. Its power is in its subtlety. Instead of forcing answers, it opens space. Tao means the way, not a destination, but the natural flow of the universe. Everything that exists, water, wind, life, death, follows the Tao. It's invisible, yet present in everything. When a person lives in harmony with the Tao, they find peace. When they fight against it, they suffer. The wise one flows with the Tao, acting without forcing, living without resisting what is. Lao Tzu teaches the principle of Wu Wei, action through non-action. It doesn't mean doing nothing. It means acting without struggle, ego, or attachment, like a tree that grows without rushing, like water that takes the shape of any container, yet slowly wears down stone. Wu Wei is living in tune with the Tao, moving naturally without trying to control everything. It's trusting the process. The Tao Te Ching values softness over strength. Lao Tzu says, "What is soft and weak beats what is hard and strong." Water is his strongest symbol, flexible but persistent. It yields, yet it wins. The message is simple. Rigidity breaks, softness endures. Strength without humility is arrogance, and the Tao brings down whatever is arrogant. Leadership, for example, shouldn't be about control but service. The best leader is the one who stays in the background but creates change, who doesn't brag but gets things done, who doesn't impose but inspires. Lao Tzu challenges the obsession with power, manipulation, and ego. Real power he says, is quiet, humble, and steady. Anyone who constantly has to prove their power has already lost it. The Tao Te Ching also praises simplicity. Lao Tzu encourages emptying the mind, reducing desire, and living with less. Not because the world is bad, but because too much pulls us away from what matters. The wise don't chase shine or status. They turn inward. They make space for the Tao by seeking stillness. A noisy mind can't hear. A soul full of wants can't follow the way. Another deep teaching is the acceptance of opposites. The Tao includes yin and yang, light and dark, masculine and feminine, high and low. Nothing exists without its opposite. Night makes sense because there is day. Weakness exists because there is strength. Health is only known because of sickness. Lao Tzu invites us to stop seeing life in black and white and start recognizing the connection between all things. For him, the greatest good isn't in conquering, but in connecting. Not in changing the world, but in letting it be what it is. He says, knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is wisdom. Real fulfillment doesn't come from achievements. It comes from understanding and living your true nature. From moving through life with lightness, awareness, and trust in the unseen flow of things. The Tao is also humility. Lao Tzu says, those who stay behind end up ahead. Those who humble themselves will be lifted up. Not as a strategy to win, but as a reflection of the Tao, which always favors what's quiet, modest, and unseen. A grain of sand supports a mountain. The hole in the wheel is what makes it spin. The empty space inside a house is what makes it livable. What is not there is just as important as what is. Reading the Tao Te Ching is like listening to music that doesn't need to be explained. You don't need to get every line. Just let the text move through you like the wind. Gentle, but transformative. Lao Tzu isn't trying to make you agree. He wants you to feel. His wisdom doesn't shout. It waits. It doesn't explain the world. It shows a way to be in it with more peace, softness, and presence. To understand the soul is to understand life itself. In On the Soul, Aristotle begins with a fundamental question. What is the soul? But he's not looking for mystery or a split between spirit and body. On the contrary, he proposes that the soul is the form of a living body, the thing that makes it what it is. The soul isn't a ghost in a machine. It's the vital principle that organizes matter and turns it into a living being. This is where Aristotle breaks from Plato. For Plato, the soul is an independent entity trapped inside the body. Aristotle, however, sees the soul and body as two sides of the same being. Just like the shape of a statue can't be separated from the marble it's made of, the soul can't be separated from the body that holds it. It's the first act of a physical body with the potential for life. The thing that makes a body alive, not just a bunch of parts. He outlines 3 types of souls, each tied to a form of life. The vegetative soul, found in plants, handles basic life functions, nutrition, growth, reproduction. The sensitive soul, found in animals, includes sensation, desire, and movement. And the rational soul, unique to humans, adds something more, the ability to think, reflect, and choose. Reason is what sets us apart. And for Aristotle, it gives us access to the highest part of life. Even the rational soul is rooted in basic life functions. There's no sense of superiority here. A human is a complete being, body and soul, matter and form. Rationality, though noble, is born from contact with the world through senses and experience. Aristotle believed the mind starts out like a blank slate, shaped by what it experiences. We think because we feel. We reflect because we're alive. He also looks closely at the senses: sight, hearing, touch. These are ways the soul interacts with the world. But perception isn't passive. When we see something, the soul is symbolically changed by it. For a moment, it becomes what it perceives. That shows how deep the connection is between the self and the world. We don't just observe reality, we're shaped by it. Aristotle also says the soul has appetites and desires. Living beings don't just sit still. They seek, avoid, chase, choose. That includes humans and animals. Desire is a life force. In humans, desire becomes ethical when it's shaped by reason. Living well means organizing our desires, practicing moderation, and creating harmony between impulse and awareness. The rational part of the soul, Aristotle says, also has two sides. One that reasons and can change, practical reason, and one that's eternal and unchanging, pure reason tied to contemplation. This opens the door to his idea that the highest life is the contemplative life, not because it turns away from the world, but because it brings out what's deepest in us, the love of truth, the search for the eternal, connection to what doesn't change. But Aristotle also values the practical soul, the one that feels, chooses, acts. Knowledge isn't complete until it becomes action. The soul, in this sense, isn't a floating substance. It's an active principle. It animates, organizes, moves, decides. It's the center of life, and that's why he refuses to see it as something mystical or separate. To study the soul is to understand what it means to be alive. One of the key points in the work is that the soul doesn't exist without the body, but it's also not reducible to it. The soul isn't a location, but a function. It has no weight, but it has form. It's what makes it possible for a being to respond to the world, grow, move, perceive, desire, and think. There's no thing called a soul hiding inside us. There's a way of being that brings matter to life. At its core, On the Soul is a work about integration. Aristotle shows us that life isn't made of sharp divisions, but of harmonious relationships between body, senses, reason, and the Yi, world. Studying the soul is about understanding how existence flows, from the simplest vital drive to the deepest contemplation of truth. It's an invitation to see that being human isn't just about thinking, it's about living fully through everything the soul allows us to be. If you enjoy this kind of content, philosophy for everyday life, deep reflections, and books that really make you think, make sure to subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any upcoming videos, and you can keep exploring these ideas with us. Nietzsche wrote, "The gay science like someone laughing with fire in their hands." It's a book where laughter isn't about being carefree. It's a way of facing pain with courage. Gay, in this case, means joyful, but not in a naive way. It's tragic joy, the kind that comes after the fall of idols, when a person accepts the lack of given meaning and still chooses to create their own. This is the book where Nietzsche announces one of his most radical and famous ideas, the death of God. But this death isn't just an attack on the divine figure. It's a critique of a culture that, while claiming to live without God, still clings to moral values rooted in religion. God is dead, says the character known as the madman. And no one realizes the abyss that this opens. Because if God is dead, all absolute certainties vanish. The foundation for morality, truth, and meaning dissolves. So then what's left? Nietzsche answers boldly. Humanity remains, with its freedom, its fragility, and its power. If there's no given meaning, then it's up to us to invent it. But to do that, people need to break free from old chains. They must reject the morality of the weak, the guilt, the denial of the body and life. Only then can the free spirit emerge. Someone who dares to think independently, create new values, and live faithfully to the earth. The tone of the gay science is both provocative and lyrical. Nietzsche blends aphorisms, poetry, reflections, and direct conversations with the reader. It's a book written with intensity and lightness at once, like dancing on ruins. He speaks of the need to laugh at yourself, to cultivate personal style, to turn your life into a work of art. For Nietzsche, A philosopher isn't someone who seeks cold truth, but someone who lives creatively, artistically, and bravely in the face of chaos. One of the book's most striking ideas is the concept of eternal recurrence. Nietzsche asks, what if a demon told you that this life, exactly as you're living it now, would be lived over and over again, infinitely, in the same way? It's an existential test. If the idea of reliving your life endlessly fills you with dread, maybe you're not living well. But if you can say yes to the eternal return, with all of life's pain and beauty, then you've found a true affirmation of existence. This idea demands a shift in consciousness. It calls us to stop waiting for salvation, for an afterlife, for a reward. Nietzsche invites us to live life as if it were the end itself, as if each moment mattered completely, without needing anything beyond its intensity. It's the opposite of renunciation. It's an ethic of presence, of creation, of power. The book also offers a deep critique of the ideal of objective truth. Nietzsche doesn't trust reason as a neutral tool. He says there are no facts, only interpretations. Truth is always a perspective. Every philosophy is really a hidden autobiography. Behind ideas are bodies, emotions, and forces. That's why thinking should be honest with itself. Not chasing some abstract truth, but revealing the drives behind your own perspective. The gay science is also where Nietzsche declares his love for life, even knowing it's tragic, fleeting, filled with suffering and uncertainty. He writes, "I love life because it is what it is." There's no idealization here, only fierce acceptance. Loving life without promises of redemption or guarantees, that's amor fati, the love of fate Nietzsche proposes. A radical embrace of what is, not what should be. The figure of the overman, Übermensch, also starts to take shape in this work. Not as a biologically or morally superior being, but as someone who rises above the old values. The overman is the creator of new meanings, the dancer stepping on the ashes of traditional morality to invent a new way to live. He doesn't submit, he chooses. At its core, the gay science is a call for authenticity, a call to leave behind guilt and fear and create a way of being that's true, even if it's lonely. Nietzsche doesn't offer comfort, he offers fire. But it's a fire that lights the way and burns away everything that keeps us from being free. Instead of certainty, he gives us art. Instead of obedience, personal style. And instead of redemption, the tragic beauty of a life lived with full intensity. Heidegger didn't just want to think about being, he wanted to reopen the question philosophy had forgotten. What does it mean to be? Since Plato and Aristotle, philosophy had treated being as something obvious. But Heidegger argued that this obviousness is deceptive. We exist, things exist, the world is here, but we rarely ask what it means to be here. Being and Time is his radical attempt to recover that fundamental question, starting not with theory, but with the concrete experience of existence. To do this, Heidegger begins with something very specific, the human being. But he doesn't talk about some abstract idea of man with a fixed essence. He uses the word Dasein, a German term that literally means being there. Dasein is the being that can ask the question of being. It's the being that relates to its own existence, and its main feature is that it is in the world, among things, making choices, taking action, even before it reflects on itself. Dasein isn't a detached consciousness. It's always a being in a situation, a being in the world. And this already breaks from the long tradition of separating subject from object, mind from body, self from world. For Heidegger, that split is artificial. From the start, we are thrown into a world full of relationships, tasks, and concerns. A hammer isn't just an object, it's something we use, something meaningful in practical terms. The world, isn't a neutral stage. It's a space of lived meaning. But everyday life, for Heidegger, is often marked by an inauthentic way of being. We get caught up in the they, what they say, what they do, what they expect. We don't choose for ourselves. We let society's norms carry us along. We live in the comforting middle ground of routine, avoiding anxiety, big decisions, and the reality of our own mortality. And it's exactly this finitude that Heidegger wants to put back at the center of our lives. Finitude shows up powerfully in his analysis of anxiety. While fear has an object, something specific that threatens us, anxiety is deeper. It doesn't have a clear what. It's a sense that everything loses ground. In anxiety, the everyday world breaks down. Things stop making sense, and in that emptiness, Dasein faces itself without its usual masks. Anxiety reveals that we are beings toward death. Heidegger says Dasein is the only being that knows it will die. Death isn't just a biological event. It's a structure of existence. We're always on the way to the end. And when we realize this, we can live more authentically, not in despair, but with clarity. The awareness of death calls us to own our time, to live with presence, to stop getting lost in the distractions of the they. That's Heidegger's idea of authenticity. It's not about being unique or different. It's a way of existing where Dasein accepts its finite condition and takes responsibility for its life. It's the opposite of living on autopilot. It means responding to the call of being, to the mystery of existence, with choice and courage. Time, then, isn't just a line of seconds ticking by. Heidegger sees time as the horizon where being shows up. Dasein projects into the future, understands itself through the past, and acts in the present. Time isn't linear, it's existential. It's the backdrop that shapes how we are. That's why the book is called Being and Time. Being can't be thought outside of lived time. Being and time doesn't give easy answers. It's dense, demanding, often difficult. But it's also one of the deepest works ever written about what it means to be human. Heidegger invites us to wake up from the sleep of routine and face both the weight and the wonder of existence. He doesn't want us to think of being as something abstract. He wants us to feel the question of being here and now. In the end, Heidegger isn't chasing theoretical definitions. He wants philosophy that touches life, that helps us dwell in being with more truth. To be authentic is to remember that we're just passing through, and that it's this passing that gives meaning to how we choose to live each moment. Carol Gilligan listened to what traditional philosophy had often ignored: women's voices. In Ethics of Care, she breaks away from the idea that morality is only about rules, duties, and abstract principles. For her, ethics isn't just about impartiality. It's also about relationships, empathy, and mutual responsibility. It's an ethical view that doesn't only ask what is fair, but also who will be affected by my choice, and how can I care for the relationship that's at stake here. Gilligan developed her theory after noticing that dominant moral models, like the one proposed by her mentor Lawrence Kohlberg, described moral development as a climb toward universal logic based on laws, contracts, and justice. But when she interviewed girls and women, she noticed something different. They didn't view moral dilemmas as isolated decisions about right and wrong. They thought about relationships, emotional consequences, and context. And that wasn't a flaw, it was a different kind of moral wisdom. The ethics of care grows out of this attention to relationships. It recognizes that we are interdependent beings, and our moral decisions don't just impact outcomes. They affect people, bonds, and human connections. Gilligan argues that there are two equally important moral voices: the voice of justice and the voice of care. Justice focuses on fairness, equality, and universal rules. Care focuses on connection, context, and recognizing individual needs. She doesn't say these voices are strictly tied to gender. Men can act from a place of care, and women can act based on justice. But historically, the voice of care has been undervalued or dismissed, associated with the feminine, the private, and emotion, while abstract reason has been held up as the moral ideal. Gilligan challenges that hierarchy. For her, care isn't less than reason. It's another way of being ethical. In practice, this means moral decisions shouldn't be reduced to applying a cold rule. We need to listen, understand, and treat others as real people. The core question of care ethics is often, how do I protect this relationship without harming myself or the other person? That takes sensitivity, not neutrality. It means listening before judging, being present before correcting. It's an exercise in awareness, attention, and shared humanity. Gilligan illustrates this with simple but powerful examples, like a girl facing a moral question about honesty. She doesn't just ask whether lying is right or wrong. She wonders whether telling the truth could hurt someone, and if there's a way to protect both sides. In this view, morality isn't about ready-made answers. It's about the responsibility to preserve connection without betraying your own integrity. This changes how we think about moral development. The ethics of care sees it not as a straight path toward abstract reasoning, but as a journey filled with listening, uncertainty, involvement, and thoughtful decisions. Growing morally means learning to care more deeply, not just learning to follow rules more precisely. Gilligan also makes an essential point. Care is not the same as submission. It doesn't mean erasing yourself or always sacrificing. Care is active, it's demanding, and it includes self-care. Often, women are taught to care for everyone else and forget themselves, and that too is an ethical issue. The ethics of care requires balance, caring without disappearing, listening without silencing yourself, welcoming others without getting hurt. This way of thinking has major implications. In education, it means raising students not just to follow rules, but to build empathy and cooperation. In law, it means seeing people as more than legal roles, as individuals with stories and pain. In politics, it proposes a new model. Leaders who care for the collective through listening and responsibility, not just impersonal talk about duty and law. At its core, Gilligan calls for a more grounded, lived morality. An ethics rooted not in distant theories, but in the everyday experience of human connection. And this ethics doesn't reject justice, it completes it. Because wherever there is care, there is also a desire for fairness. And wherever there is real justice, there is room for care. Ethics of care is ultimately an invitation to rethink how we treat others, not as objects of judgment, but as fellow humans sharing the fragility of life. To care isn't just a practice, it's a way of seeing, being, and choosing. And maybe it's one of the deepest expressions of resistance and humanity we have. Standing before his accusers, Socrates doesn't beg, justify himself, or back down. He speaks with calm, firmness, and a kind of honesty that still echoes centuries later. In the Apology of Socrates, Plato doesn't just record a trial. He captures an act of intellectual courage, a living example of what it means to love truth more than life itself. Socrates is accused of corrupting the youth and of not believing in the city's gods, but his response goes much deeper. He doesn't defend himself like a typical defendant. He explains his philosophical mission. He says that an oracle once claimed no one was wiser than him, and in trying to understand this, he questioned people who claimed to be wise. What did he discover? That he knew he didn't know, while others believed they knew things they didn't. That awareness of his own ignorance is what makes Socrates truly wise. Not because he collected knowledge, but because he understood the limits of human knowledge. He goes further. He says his mission is to wake up the citizens of Athens like a gadfly buzzing around a lazy horse. He provokes, questions, and shakes things up. Not to destroy, but to make people think. To get each person to examine their life. Because, as he says, an unexamined life is not worth living. This is the heart of his philosophy, caring for the soul. Socrates insists that what matters most is not success, fame, or money, but moral integrity. He says, we shouldn't fear death, but rather fear living wrongly. Death is a mystery, but cowardice, lies, and injustice are clear wrongs. That's why he chooses death over abandoning his mission to seek truth. The apology is an ethical shock. Socrates refuses to act the way the court expects. He doesn't flatter the jury or fake regret. He doesn't bargain with his conscience. When asked what penalty he deserves, he sarcastically suggests a lifetime pension, as if he were a hero of the city. This isn't arrogance, it's consistency. He believes what he did was out of love for truth and for Athens. He has no regrets because he lived with integrity. After being sentenced, Socrates remains calm. He says the judges are not killing him, only his body. His soul and his pursuit of truth cannot be destroyed by a verdict. He even says death might be a gift, either a dreamless sleep or a chance to meet great minds of the past. And in either case, there is nothing to fear. Fear of death, he says, is pretending to know what you don't, the very thing he spent his life avoiding. He also warns the Athenians, by killing someone who questions, they don't solve a problem. They expose their own intolerance. Philosophy won't die with him. If anything, his death proves how uncomfortable truth is for those who prefer illusion. He tells his students to keep seeking virtue, to keep questioning, and to care more about their souls than about appearances. Plato's text is more than a record. It's a declaration about the dignity of reason and individual conscience. Socrates shows that a true philosopher doesn't seek applause or safety. He seeks consistency between what he believes and how he lives, and when that has a price, he's ready to pay it. The apology is also a call to personal responsibility. Socrates doesn't put his life in the hands of fate or the state. He acts freely, and that freedom isn't arrogance, it's loyalty to his purpose. By refusing to abandon philosophy, even in the face of death, he shows that living truthfully is more important than just staying alive. In the end, Socrates says, "Now it is time to go, I to die, and you to live. Which of us goes to the better fate is known to no one except the God." These aren't words of despair, they're words of wisdom. He accepts death as part of the mystery of life. And in doing so, he turns his death into one final lesson. The ethical life is the one that stays true to the truth, even if the whole world disagrees. Heraclitus didn't write treatises. He wrote short, sharp, and mysterious sentences, fragments of thought that provoke more than explain. But in each one, there's a universe. He wasn't searching for fixed truths, but for the truth of movement, the constant flow and contradiction within all things. Everything flows, he says. Nothing stays the same. And anyone looking for stability in being without understanding the rhythm of becoming has missed the true nature of reality. One of his most famous fragments says, "No one steps into the same river twice, because when you return, the river has changed, and so have you. The water touching your feet isn't the same, and neither are you." This teaching isn't just poetic, it's ontological. Heraclitus saw the world as constant change. There's no unchanging essence, no place of rest. Everything is transformation. But he doesn't see this as a loss. Unlike other thinkers who sought something eternal and fixed, Heraclitus embraces change as the very essence of being. Change isn't disorder, it's what creates order. Life happens through flow. That's why he says, "Illness makes health, pleasant, evil makes good, hunger makes satisfaction, fatigue makes rest." In other words, everything is defined by its opposite. Harmony is made of tension. This leads him to see the world as a creative conflict. He writes, "War is the father of all things." But he doesn't mean war as destruction. He means the clash that brings form, life, balance, like the bow and the lyre, which only make music because of the tension between opposites. For Heraclitus, the cosmos is not chaos. It's a dynamic, order ruled by a principle he calls the Logos. The Logos isn't just reason, it's the hidden structure behind change. It's present in everything, but few people notice it. He writes, "Though the Logos is universal, most people live as if they have their own private understanding. Heraclitus sees ignorance as blindness to the whole. When we only look at the parts, we miss the rhythm of the full picture. The Logos demands careful listening, sensitivity, and the ability to see beyond surface appearances." At the same time, Heraclitus criticizes comfort and superficial thinking. He doesn't soften his words. He calls people dreamers, asleep, lost, in illusions. His philosophy is a wake-up call. To think for him is to face the tension of reality, the instability of all things. It's to stop chasing final answers and accept that true wisdom is found in the dialogue between opposites. His fragments also carry a quiet spirituality. He writes, "The path up and the path down are one and the same." It's a symbol of the unity of opposites. What seems contradictory is actually connected. Going up includes going down. Birth already contains the seed of death. Day brings night. This isn't pessimism, it's clarity. Because once we accept the cycle, we stop resisting the nature of time. Heraclitus is also a thinker of the moment. He recognizes the depth of the now. The present isn't just a point between past and future. It's the place where being unfolds. In a single moment, everything can change. That's why living requires awareness, presence, and surrender. For him, wisdom isn't about mastering the world. It's about flowing through it with clarity and humility. Even though he wrote little, or little survived, Heraclitus influenced the entire history of philosophy. Plato, Nietzsche, Heidegger, all engaged with his vision of reality. And that's no coincidence, because his short fragments express the most restless core of human thought, the search for meaning in a world that never stands still. Heraclitus doesn't give us a system, he gives us insights, sparks of truth that cut through pre-made thinking. And in doing so, he teaches that knowledge isn't about resting, it's about movement. That wisdom isn't stacking up certainties, but dancing with the flow of reality, knowing that the only constant is change. If you enjoy this kind of content, philosophy applied to life, deep reflections, and books that really make you think, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos and can keep exploring this journey with us. Thus, the battlefield is set. On one side stands Arjuna, a noble warrior about to fight against his own relatives, teachers, and friends. On the other side lies the chaos of doubt, pain, and inner conflict. It's in this moment that the voice of Krishna emerges, not as a military leader, but as a spiritual guide. The Bhagavad Gita begins with war, but it's not about killing enemies. It's about something deeper, the inner battle between duty and desire, between action and fear, between ego and the true self. Arjuna hesitates. He doesn't want to fight. He's filled with compassion, but also confusion. He asks, "What is my duty?" And that question lies at the heart of the Gita, not just for Arjuna, but for anyone facing hard choices in life. Krishna, representing divine wisdom, responds with a philosophy that blends action, detachment, knowledge, and devotion. He doesn't tell Arjuna to run away. He tells him to act without attachment, in alignment with Dharma, the righteous path. Krishna explains that we should not act for the sake of rewards. Clinging to outcomes is what causes suffering. He teaches how to act with pure intention, focused on doing what's right and leaving the results to the divine. This is the essence of karma yoga, the path of action. True freedom doesn't come from avoiding responsibility, but from doing what must be done without being enslaved by success or failure. But acting without attachment doesn't mean acting without care. In fact, it means showing up fully, with presence, with focus, with heart. Action becomes a path of purification. The ego dissolves when the I stops chasing rewards and starts serving something greater, A warrior who fights without hatred is wiser than a scholar who avoids action out of fear of being wrong. As the dialogue unfolds, Krishna reveals a deeper understanding of the self. He teaches that the true self, the Atman, is not born, doesn't die, and doesn't change. It is eternal, immortal, unshakable. The body may fall, but the self remains. Suffering comes from the illusion that we are only our bodies, roles, and emotions. Wisdom means realizing what within us is eternal, silent, and indestructible. This vision leads to another core lesson of the Gita: equanimity. A wise person isn't lifted up by success or crushed by failure. They view joy and sorrow, gain and loss, victory and defeat with the same steady heart. Not because they're cold, but because they understand that everything that changes is temporary. Krishna says, "Be steady in happiness and sadness, in gain and loss, in victory and defeat." That steadiness is not harshness, it's clarity. It's the calm that comes from seeing beyond appearances. The Gita also explores other spiritual paths beyond karma yoga. There is Jnana yoga, the path of knowledge, which seeks liberation through deep understanding. And there is Bhakti yoga, the path of devotion, where surrender isn't just rational, but full of love. To love the divine, trust in it, and offer yourself to it. That is the heart of Bhakti. Krishna says that even those who are imperfect can reach the eternal if their faith is sincere. But what makes the Gita so powerful is how it brings these paths together. It doesn't ask you to choose between action and contemplation, or between reason and faith. It shows that true wisdom is integration. Action guided by knowledge becomes prayer. Knowledge combined with love brings freedom. Surrender practiced with awareness lights up the soul. This is a philosophy of unity, where the world is not rejected but transcended through consciousness. In the end, Arjuna understands, not because he was given a simple answer, but because he was guided to see beyond himself. The outer war goes on, but the inner war is over. He rises with calm and clarity. He's ready to act, not because he feels nothing, but because now he knows who he is, what he must do, and who he serves. The Bhagavad Gita is a conversation between the human and the eternal, a call to responsibility, but also to surrender, an invitation to act with courage, but without ego, to live in the world, but not be consumed by it, and above all to realize that the real battlefield isn't out there, it's within. The public torture of Damiens, drawn and quartered in front of a crowd in 1757, opens discipline and punish with a jolt, not just because of the violence itself, but because of how it contrasts with what came later. The quiet discipline of modern prisons. Foucault wants to understand this shift, not as a sign of moral progress, but as a transformation of power. The question isn't why we stop torturing, but what kind of control now hides behind the softening of punishment. For Foucault, punishment has never just been about justice. It's a tool of power, and the way it works reveals how a society is structured, who's in charge, who obeys, and why. In the past, punishment was public, ritualized, and brutal. Today, it's invisible, internalized, and technical. Power no longer wounds the body, it trains the soul, and that training is a far more effective form of control. At the center of this transformation is the idea of discipline. Discipline isn't imposed by kings, but by institutions, schools, hospitals, factories, military bases, and prisons. It organizes space, time, and behavior. It teaches people how to sit, be quiet, follow rules, and be productive. It doesn't rely on brute force, but on surveillance and norms. Its goal is simple: to produce useful, obedient bodies. Foucault shows how disciplinary power works in everyday life. The student in the classroom, the worker on the assembly line, the soldier in basic training, they're all part of the same system, being watched, corrected, and normalized. Discipline doesn't just control the body, it shapes it. And the more subtle it is, the more powerful. The ideal isn't to impose control from the outside, but to make people control themselves. That's where the metaphor of the panopticon comes in, based on Jeremy Bentham's prison design. A central tower allows one guard to watch every cell, without the prisoners knowing if they're being watched, so they start watching themselves. The panopticon doesn't need walls or guards. It works because it creates self-censorship. And this design goes far beyond prisons. It becomes a model for society. Foucault isn't saying we literally live in prisons. He's saying the logic of the panopticon, one-sided visibility, constant surveillance, and behavior normalization, is everywhere. Security cameras, report cards, medical exams, ID badges, tracking algorithms, they all follow the same pattern. Modern people aren't controlled by force, but by being seen. This marks a new economy of power. Public punishment was messy. It sparked sympathy and rebellion. Discipline, on the other hand, is quiet, efficient, and anonymous. Power isn't concentrated in a king's hands anymore. It's spread across institutions, systems of knowledge, and expert discourse. More than that, it doesn't just dominate people, it produces them. The modern individual is not just controlled by power, they're shaped by it. And prison, according to Foucault, it doesn't reform anyone. That's the hard truth. It reproduces crime, labels people as delinquents, and separates the normal from the abnormal. But at the same time, it boosts the authority of judges, psychologists, and criminologists, and strengthens the belief that power works for the good. The justice system doesn't exist to eliminate crime, but to maintain order and create a class of people who can be controlled. Foucault breaks down the idea that institutions are neutral. He shows that knowledge and power always go hand in hand. It's not just about punishment, it's about classification, diagnosis, normalization. What we call normal is the result of historical processes and systems of control, not an objective truth. Madness, crime, sexuality, all are built within power structures. Discipline and Punish isn't just a critique of prisons, it's an X-ray of modern society. Foucault reveals how modern power doesn't scream. It whispers through policies, schedules, statistics, and care. And it's precisely because it seems less violent that it's harder to resist. In the end, the real question is, are we truly free or just well-trained? According to Foucault, modern freedom may just be a form of control so well-designed, so deeply normalized, that we no longer notice it. And if that's the case, then resistance doesn't mean fighting a visible tyrant. It means waking up from normal and rethinking how we've been taught to live. John Stuart Mill wrote Utilitarianism not just to explain a moral theory, but to defend it as a legitimate foundation for modern ethics. He starts from a simple but powerful idea. Moral good is whatever promotes the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. That's the core of utilitarianism, an ethics based on consequences, where the value of an action is measured by the well-being it creates. But Mill goes further than the original version proposed by his predecessor, Jeremy Bentham. While Bentham believed that the quantity of pleasure was the deciding factor, Mill introduced a key distinction. There are higher and lower pleasures. It's not just about measuring sensations. It's about recognizing that some kinds of pleasure, like those from reason, imagination, or moral reflection, are more meaningful than purely physical ones. He famously wrote, "It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied." In other words, the quality of our experiences matters just as much as the quantity. Human happiness is about more than comfort. It involves dignity, freedom, culture, and intellectual growth. Mill understood that people have moral and rational depth that can't be ignored in favor of shallow gratification. For Mill, utilitarianism isn't selfish, it's deeply social. Unlike what many critics claim, it doesn't encourage people to only chase personal happiness. On the contrary, moral value comes from considering the collective impact of our actions. Ethics, in this view, isn't about eternal commandments, it's about responsible choices and how our behavior affects others. He also addresses a common critique. If utilitarianism is about maximizing overall good, doesn't that justify immoral acts in the name of the greater good? His response is clear. Utilitarianism isn't permissive or careless. It considers long-term consequences, not just short-term results. Mill argued that justice, honesty, and individual rights must be protected because violating them tends to cause more harm than good. Mill also points out that utilitarianism doesn't have to be applied rigidly, like a cold moral math equation. He saw the value in general rules, like don't kill, don't lie, keep your promises, because these principles build trust, stability, and collective happiness. But these rules work because they serve the common good, not because they're absolute or sacred. At the heart of Mill's thinking is the idea that morality is a collective, ongoing project. Ethics, for him, is part of human development, something that evolves with society. That's why he believed a more just, free, and enlightened world is possible. If we're willing to judge our actions based on the good they produce, not just inherited customs or rigid dogmas. This ethical vision is tightly linked to his defense of individual liberty, as he outlines in On Liberty. For Mill, freedom is essential. People can only be truly happy if they're free to pursue their own version of a good life, as long as it doesn't harm others. In this way, liberty and utilitarianism aren't in conflict. They support each other. He also believed education plays a crucial role in ethics. Humans aren't naturally focused on the common good. They have to learn, reflect, and develop empathy. For utilitarianism to work, we need citizens who are informed, thoughtful, and capable of thinking beyond themselves. Morality isn't automatic. It's something we grow into. At its core, utilitarianism is a call for rational responsibility. It's not enough to blindly follow rules or act on instinct. We need to evaluate, weigh, and think about the real impact of our decisions. It's a demanding ethic, not because it asks for blind sacrifice, but because it insists we always consider the other and recognize their well-being as part of our own. Mill offers a moral vision centered on happiness, but uplifted by reason and justice. He doesn't promise perfection or easy answers, but he believes that with reflection, empathy, and education, we can build a fairer world, not out of idealism, but because the good of all truly is the best good for each one of us. Massimo Pigliucci begins his Stoic journey with a very modern and direct question: how should we live? It's not a theoretical question, it's a practical one. Faced with life's uncertainties, the chaos of the world, and everyday anxiety, he turns to a philosophy that offers real guidance instead of empty promises. And he finds it in Stoicism, especially in the teachings of Epictetus, a calm, steady, and deeply liberating path. For Pigliucci, Stoicism isn't about being emotionless or unshakable. It's about living with reason, acceptance, and personal responsibility. The first key idea is this: some things are under our control and some aren't. This simple distinction is the heart of Stoic ethics. We don't control what happens to us, but we do control how we respond, how we think, and what we choose. Putting energy into things we can't control only leads to suffering. True freedom starts when we focus only on what's actually in our hands. Pigliucci brings Epictetus into the book like a personal mentor. Throughout the chapters, he addresses the ancient philosopher directly, almost like an ongoing conversation across time. It gives the book an intimate, almost journal-like tone. He doesn't write as someone who has it all figured out. He writes as someone learning to live better. That makes philosophy feel human, approachable. Stoicism doesn't demand perfection, it demands daily practice. Another important idea is that Stoicism isn't about giving up. It's about acting with intention. Accepting what you can't change isn't passive, it's wise. A true Stoic isn't checked out. They're engaged, but without getting obsessed with outcomes. They act with virtue, do what's right, and leave the results to fate, to to the universe, to the natural order. Ethical action doesn't depend on success. It depends on integrity. Pigliucci also breaks the myth that Stoics are cold and emotionless. Stoics don't reject emotions. They reject uncontrolled emotions that dominate us. Blind anger, paralyzing fear, obsessive desire, those are the enemies of inner peace. But calm joy, love for humanity, and rational compassion, those are welcome. The goal isn't to erase emotion, but to train it through reason. He brings Stoicism into the modern world, talking about politics, consumerism, social media, anxiety, death, injustice, all through the lens of Stoic thinking. And his conclusion is clear. Stoic principles are timeless because they speak to the core of what it means to be human. The world may change, but we still wrestle with loss, frustration, desire, fear, and ego. One of the most powerful parts of the book is his take on death. For Stoics, death isn't a tragedy. It's a natural part of life. We shouldn't fear it. We should understand it. Knowing life is short helps us value the present, focus on what really matters, and live more authentically. Facing death isn't morbid. It's freeing. It reminds us not to waste time on things outside our control. Pigliucci also emphasizes virtue. For the Stoics, happiness isn't pleasure or success. It's living with virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. These are the 4 cardinal virtues of Stoicism. Everything else, fame, money, health, is indifferent. It can be good or bad, but it doesn't define a good life. A virtuous person can be happy even in hardship. A life guided by virtue is a life well lived. He also shows how to practice Stoicism day to day, keeping a reflective journal, remembering that everything is temporary, doing moral check-ins, contemplating death, practicing gratitude and detachment. It's not about living like an ancient sage. It's about using Stoic tools to face real-life challenges. It's a philosophy of action, a constant workout for the soul. How to be a Stoic isn't some abstract theory. It's a practical invitation. Pigliucci brings ancient wisdom to life with modern relevance. He shows that being Stoic today isn't about being cold. It's about being clear. It's having the courage to accept fate without ever giving up on virtue. It's building a kind of peaceful strength that doesn't depend on the world, because it comes from within. Bertrand Russell opens with a simple yet powerful observation. Most people aren't happy. And what's even more surprising, he says, is that this unhappiness often doesn't come from external circumstances. It comes from within. In The Conquest of Happiness, Russell sets out to explore what holds us back from living well, and what brings us closer to genuine happiness. Not as a promise of constant joy, but as a steady, lasting sense of fulfillment. He divides the book into 2 parts, the causes of unhappiness and the paths to happiness. And in both, Russell is clear, honest, and generous. He doesn't write like a distant guru. He writes like someone who's also struggled with anxiety and found ways to deal with it, not through dogma, but through reason, sensitivity, and experience. 1 of the first causes of unhappiness he points to is relentless competition. We constantly compare our lives, bodies, and accomplishments to others. And in doing that, we lose sight of our own true desires. Russell warns, when we chase success only as a reflection of social expectations, even winning can feel empty. Real happiness only starts when we let go of the obsession with being better than others and begin to seek meaning. Another obstacle is boredom. Not just the lack of activity, but the lack of genuine interest in life. Russell criticizes the dullness of mechanical routines, but he also points out that the constant craving for stimulation is just as hollow. The key, he says, is to cultivate curiosity, openness, and engagement with the world. Life is rich, but to see it that way, we have to stop looking only at ourselves. He also discusses anxiety, which he sees as the opposite of trust in life. Anxiety is living in the future, constantly stressing over what might go wrong, freezing at the thought of failure. Russell suggests a kind of philosophical humility. Accept that you can't control everything, but you can choose where to focus your mental energy. Living means taking risks, and that's not something to panic over. It's what makes life real. The way out, according to Russell, is through outward interest. Happiness doesn't come from constant introspection. It comes from opening up to the world, to people, to ideas. The truly happy person is one who is genuinely interested in things outside themselves: art, nature, work, other people. Unhappiness grows when the self becomes a closed center, concerned only with its own worries. When he talks about love, Russell is both sincere and realistic. He sees genuine affection as one of the greatest sources of lasting happiness. But he also warns, love that clings, that controls, that tries to fill a void, tends to fall apart. True love is expansive and generous. It's built on admiration and freedom. To love, for Russell, isn't to lose yourself, it's to grow. Another pillar of happiness is meaningful work. Russell doesn't romanticize work as our sole source of identity, but he does recognize that engaging in tasks that require effort, creativity, and real contribution can bring deep satisfaction. The best kind of work connects you to something bigger than yourself, whether that's a cause, a project, or helping others. That kind of connection is one of the most powerful paths to fulfillment. Russell also emphasizes the value of humor and lightness. He warns against taking life too seriously in a moralistic way. It can turn life into a burden. Being able to laugh at yourself, to accept your own mistakes, and not demand perfection, these are, to him, key virtues. Life is imperfect, and that's exactly why it should be lived with intelligence and compassion. At its core, the conquest of happiness isn't a self-help manual. It's a rational manifesto for real joy. Russell doesn't offer magic fixes, but he clearly lays out the paths he himself walked to escape existential despair. He shows that happiness isn't something you wait for. It's something you build day by day, through conscious choices, meaningful relationships, and a mind open to the world. If you enjoy content like this, philosophy applied to real life, deep reflections, and books that truly make you think, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any upcoming videos and can keep following along on this journey with us. Paul Tillich doesn't write for those seeking comfort. He writes for those staring into the abyss. The Courage to Be is a deep dive into what it means to be human when we're faced with anxiety, doubt, death, guilt, and above all, the loss of meaning. Tillich doesn't offer easy answers. What he offers is rarer: courage. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to affirm life in spite of it. To him, human beings are always standing face to face with the threat of non-being. That confrontation with nothingness is unavoidable. We might ignore it for a while, but it catches up to us in moments of loss, loneliness, illness, or simply the passage of time. Tillich identifies three main forms of this threat: the anxiety of death, the anxiety of guilt, and the anxiety of meaninglessness. The first is the most obvious. We are mortal. We know we're going to die. This awareness of our own finiteness sets us apart from other animals, and it can be paralyzing. Fear of death can push us toward distraction, superficiality, even denial. But Tillich says, the courage to be is the courage to exist, even in the face of death. It's choosing to live fully, even when we know nothing lasts forever. The second kind is the anxiety of guilt, not just moral guilt, but existential guilt. We know we fall short. We miss the mark, fail our ideals, make mistakes we can't undo. That kind of guilt can eat away at us. But again, Tillich says the courage to be means owning our failures without being defined by them. It's about understanding that guilt is part of the human journey and that grace is still possible. But perhaps the most devastating anxiety in the modern world is the fear of meaninglessness. In an age where old belief systems have collapsed, where God seems silent and absolute values have faded, many people are left asking a hard question: why live at all? This is the anxiety of nihilism, apathy, and losing direction. Here, Tillich echoes thinkers like Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, but with one key difference. He doesn't stop at the abyss. For Tillich, the courage to be also means having the courage to believe that meaning can rise out of emptiness. It's not about rebuilding the old certainties. It's about walking through uncertainty with integrity. It's in the very confrontation with the void that being reveals itself. Tillich calls this being itself, a kind of existence that doesn't rely on outside validation, but is rooted in a deep internal foundation. And that foundation, for Tillich, has a name: God. But not a God as a person in the sky. Tillich speaks of God as the ground of being, the source that makes being itself possible. God is not out there, but found in the depth of our being, in whatever holds us up when everything else seems to fall apart. Faith, then, isn't about accepting religious doctrines. It's the courageous act of saying yes to existence in the face of nothingness. It's a surrender to what transcends us, yet also lives within us. Tillich also makes a key distinction between two kinds of courage: individual courage, which affirms our personal being in the face of our own anxieties, and participatory courage, which recognizes we are part of something larger, a community, a history, a whole. True courage holds both. It doesn't isolate us, and it doesn't erase us either. It says yes to the I without forgetting the we. The courage to be isn't heroic in the traditional sense. It's not about being fearless or dominating life. It's more about a calm acceptance of reality, even when it's harsh, ambiguous, or unclear. It's recognizing that we don't control everything, but we still get to choose how we respond. It's standing tall when the world around you crumbles. It's staring into the void and saying, yes, even so, I choose to be. In the end, Tillich doesn't give us a recipe for happiness. He gives us a path toward authenticity. He reminds us that suffering is part of existence, but there is a depth within us that resists non-being. And that depth, whether we call it soul, being, God, or the ground of being, calls us to live with courage, to love with courage, and to be with courage. Alfred North Whitehead didn't see the world as something fixed, but as something constantly in the making. In Process and Reality, he proposes a bold and revolutionary idea. Reality isn't made up of things, but of processes. Everything that exists is in motion, in change, in relationship. For him, being is less about substance and more about becoming. This shift in perspective breaks with a long philosophical tradition that viewed the universe as a collection of static entities defined by their essence. Whitehead flips the script. There are no unchanging essences, only events, experiences, and happenings in a constant state of flow. What is real is what happens, and what happens is always connected to everything else. The foundation of his philosophy is what he calls the ontology of events, meaning that everything that exists is an event of experience, which he calls an actual occasion. Each actual occasion is like a drop of experience, a small unit of reality that relates to the past, responds to the present, and shapes the future. Reality is made of these dynamic units, all interconnected, forming a living web of interactions. The world, then, is a continuous process of creation. And that creation isn't random. It's self-organizing, intentional, and purpose-driven. Each event seeks its own fulfillment, or satisfaction, which means a kind of integration between what it receives from the world and what it brings as something new. Creativity is the most fundamental principle of existence. Nothing simply is, everything is becoming. In this sense, Whitehead even reimagines God. For him, God isn't a static, absolute being standing apart from the world. God is part of the process. God has two sides, one eternal, which holds all possibilities, and one temporal, which feels, responds, and participates in reality. God is the source of order, but also of novelty. He is the pull of possibility. the one who invites each event to become more than mere repetition. This view of God breaks away from the traditional theistic model, but also from materialistic atheism. In Whitehead's thought, the divine doesn't intervene from outside but works from within the cosmic process, offering guidance but never control. Each being has freedom, even if it's limited, and that freedom is what makes the universe a creative drama, full of risk, pain, and beauty. Nature, according to Whitehead, also needs to be rethought. He critiques the mechanistic view of modern science, which treats objects as inert and ruled by external laws. Instead, he sees nature as alive, relational, and to some degree, sentient. Even atoms, he says, are primitive forms of experience. This isn't naive animism. It's a broadening of the concept of experience as a fundamental feature of reality. This idea that everything experiences something, even in the simplest way, leads to what's called pan-experientialism. It means experience isn't limited to humans or animals. It's a universal trait that varies in complexity and depth. Matter, life, and mind aren't separate categories, but part of a single continuum. The universe, then, is a community of beings in shared experience. Whitehead also redefines our idea of time. Time isn't just a container where events happen. Time is the process of reality unfolding. Each event inherits the past, creates a new form, and reaches into the future. The present is the moment when this creation occurs. In that sense, the story of the cosmos is a never-ending narrative of transformation. For us humans, this means that each person is also a process. We're not fixed substances, but evolving paths of experience, shaped by relationships, memory, desire, and creativity. Identity isn't a static point. It's a thread of continuity running through constant change. To live well, according to Whitehead, is to embrace that flow and collaborate with it creatively and harmoniously. Process philosophy is, at its heart, a philosophy of care, connection, and co-creation. It calls us to see the world not as a collection of resources to exploit, but as a living web where every being contributes to the beauty of the whole. In this view, evil is the refusal to relate, the closing off to new possibilities, the hardening of being. Goodness is openness, growth, and increasing harmony. Daniel Dennett opens his book with a bold move. He promises to explain consciousness, one of the biggest mysteries in philosophy and cognitive science. But his explanation isn't mystical or idealistic. On the contrary, Dennett takes a materialist, naturalist, and strongly anti-dualist approach. To him, consciousness isn't an inner theater or some magical essence. It's a complex, distributed, and evolutionary process, one we can understand using science and reason. His first step is to dismantle one of our most powerful illusions, the idea that there's a central self, an inner observer watching our thoughts and sensations like a little person in a control room. Dennett calls this the Cartesian theater, an outdated idea inherited from Descartes, which splits mind and body, subject and object, consciousness and brain. Dennett says this model is misleading and needs to be left behind. Instead, he introduces what he calls the multiple drafts model. According to this theory, consciousness doesn't happen in a single spot in the brain or in a tidy, linear sequence. Multiple interpretations, perceptions, and reactions are constantly happening in parallel across different brain regions. What we call consciousness is the temporary result of a functional consensus among these multiple drafts. There's no single point of view, just a network of interactive processes. In other words, consciousness is more like a real-time, collaborative edit than a broadcast from one camera. Each conscious experience is shaped by neural interpretations that compete, correct, and organize. But there's no boss overseeing the show. The self that feels so solid is actually an emergent effect, a story the brain tells to make sense of experience. Dennett also challenges the idea that consciousness is a sacred, untouchable mystery. He argues that many philosophers fall into the trap of qualia, the supposed pure subjective quality of experiences, like my experience of red or the taste of chocolate. These qualia are often thought to be beyond objective study. But Dennett pushes back. He says that as traditionally described, qualia don't actually explain anything. They just keep consciousness shrouded in mystery. Instead, he argues that subjective experience can be understood as a functional, behaviorally observable phenomenon. That doesn't mean reducing it all to mechanics, but it does mean recognizing that consciousness is a product of evolution, shaped by brains and environments, and it can be studied. If we treat the brain as an information processor that makes decisions, forms expectations, and builds interpretations, we can understand how the feeling of being conscious arises. Dennett also critiques the philosophical obsession with philosophical zombies, hypothetical beings exactly like us in every way except for lacking consciousness. To him, this idea is pointless and misleading. If something acts conscious, responds like a conscious being, learns like one, then it makes no sense to say something's missing inside. For Dennett, consciousness isn't some invisible substance, it's a complex function in motion. What makes this book so powerful is how it brings together philosophy, neuroscience, psychology, and evolutionary theory into one clear and compelling narrative. Dennett shows us that the human mind is the result of millions of years of adaptation, shaping our brains to be flexible, to anticipate danger, to build memory, and to tell stories about ourselves. The self is a useful construction, a working fiction that helps us plan, learn, and relate to others. This view might seem cold or dehumanizing at first, but Dennett defends it with passion, wit, and clarity. To him, seeing ourselves as complex systems doesn't take away the beauty of consciousness. It makes it even more astonishing. The fact that subjectivity can emerge from meat, neurons, and language is a triumph of nature, and understanding that process can help us become more free, more aware, and more responsible for who we are. Consciousness Explained is a philosophy that challenges deeply held beliefs. It knocks the mind off its pedestal. But it's also an invitation to admire the human experience on a whole new level, not as a magical soul, but as a natural wonder that's slowly learning to understand itself. Dan Millman was a promising college athlete when his life took an unexpected turn. After meeting a mysterious mentor nicknamed Socrates, his routine of training, achievements, and fears began to unravel from the inside out. Way of the Peaceful Warrior is the story of that transformation, a spiritual journey disguised as a personal one, where the real battlefield isn't out there, but within. Socrates, the old man who works at a gas station, is nothing like the kind of mentor Dan expected. He doesn't offer success formulas or easy answers. Instead, he challenges, provokes, watches in silence. And what he teaches cuts right through Dan's competitive ego. The true warrior doesn't fight the world. He fights illusion. He doesn't aim to defeat others, but to conquer himself. Throughout the book, Dan is forced to confront his insecurities, his pride, his anxiety about the future, and his attachment to the past. Everything he once thought was essential, titles, recognition, control, starts to crumble. Socrates insists, the present is all that exists. The mind races, judges, wants, but life only happens now, and only those who learn to live in the now can truly be free. The Peaceful Warrior's philosophy is a fusion of Eastern wisdom, stoic practice, and modern spirituality. It teaches that life is a constant dojo, where every moment is a chance to train awareness, detachment, and clarity. Living well doesn't mean living without pain. It means living with consciousness, acceptance, and purpose. The warrior isn't someone without fear, but someone who acts in spite of it. Dan goes through several crises, physical, emotional, and spiritual. But it's in those moments of rupture that the deepest learning takes place. In the book, suffering isn't a punishment, it's a wake-up call. Every fall is a lesson in disguise. Every loss reveals what truly matters. Transformation doesn't come from pretty ideas, but from directly experiencing impermanence. One of the book's core teachings is, what's missing in your life is in what you're avoiding. That sentence is a key to self-discovery. It shows that inner peace doesn't come from avoiding discomfort, but from walking through it with presence. The path of the peaceful warrior is one of courageous vulnerability, opening up to the unknown, listening to silence, accepting not knowing. Socrates repeats that the mind lies. Most of our suffering comes from repetitive thoughts, automatic judgments, and unrealistic expectations. Freedom isn't about escaping the mind, it's about learning to observe its tricks. Meditation, breathing, presence, these become daily practices. And the reward is subtle: a clearer mind, a lighter heart, a more awake body. The peaceful warrior's philosophy is also practical. It doesn't invite us to escape the world, but to engage with it consciously, eating mindfully, sleeping with gratitude, training with humility, loving with full presence. Everything becomes sacred when done with awareness. Spirituality here isn't mystical. It's lived through the everyday. It's caring for the now, for others, and for yourself. By the end of the journey, Dan doesn't become perfect. He becomes more real. He discovers that freedom isn't about conquering every challenge, but about fully accepting who you are as you walk the path. The peaceful warrior doesn't need applause. He finds strength in silence, guidance in intuition, and meaning in simplicity. This book is an invitation to wake up, not in some mystical way, but with grounded clarity. It's possible to live with lightness, even in chaos. It's possible to find peace, even when everything is shifting. But that peace requires discipline, surrender, and courage. The courage to face your own shadow, to laugh at your own ego, and to start over as many times as it takes. Way of the Peaceful Warrior isn't just a story, it's a mirror. It speaks to anyone who's tired of looking outside for something that can only be found within. It speaks to those who feel something's missing but don't know what. It speaks to those who want to live with more purpose, presence, and peace, and are ready to discover that the real path is the walk itself. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. With this powerful opening line, Rousseau begins The Social Contract, pointing out a fundamental contradiction of political life. Even though we are naturally free, we live under systems that oppress us, domesticate us, and pull us away from our true nature. What Rousseau seeks is a form of society where freedom isn't sacrificed, but rebuilt on legitimate foundations. For Rousseau, the only legitimate authority is one that comes from the consent of the governed. No power is sacred on its own, not even that of kings. Obedience is only valid if it comes from freedom, and freedom is only real if it results from a rational agreement among citizens. This agreement is what he calls the social contract, a pact where each individual joins with others, giving up total natural freedom in exchange for political, civil, and moral freedom. But this trade isn't a loss, it's a gain. Rousseau argues that by submitting to the general will, we gain a higher form of freedom. We stop being slaves to our impulses and become authors of the law. We are not ruled. We participate in creating the rules that govern us. This is the core of Rousseau's thinking. True freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's living under laws you've helped create. The general will, however, should not be confused with majority opinion or a sum of individual preferences. It represents what is common to all, the pursuit of the common good, even when it goes against personal interests. Rousseau is clear. The general will may require individual sacrifices, but it should never benefit one group at the expense of others. Its purpose is always the collective good. That's why Rousseau believes sovereignty is indivisible and cannot be handed over. It can't be represented or transferred. People can't give their power to a king or a parliament and still consider themselves free. True sovereignty lies in the direct exercise of popular will, in citizens actively participating in lawmaking. Political freedom, in this sense, demands involvement, education, and civic virtue. This ideal also calls for a specific type of society: small, tight-knit, with a culture of participation and a strong sense of community. Rousseau admits that this model is hard to apply in large, complex states, but he insists that without real citizen involvement, politics becomes disguised domination, freedom becomes hollow, and the social contract falls apart. To Rousseau, the contract is not just a legal tool, it's a moral transformation. By entering the pact, individuals rise above self-interest and live by collective reason. A human being goes from being a creature driven by instinct to a citizen guided by principle. That's why Rousseau says, the social contract transforms man from a stupid and limited animal into an intelligent and moral being. But Rousseau isn't naive. He knows that power tends to corrupt, and that the general will can be clouded by private interests. That's why the role of the legislator is crucial. The legislator is a bridge between the people and the laws, not as a ruler, but as a political educator. Their job is to shape the people into a collective body, to awaken civic consciousness. They don't impose laws, they help the people discover them. The kind of freedom Rousseau defends isn't just individual, it's deeply political. He believes that no one is truly free in an unjust society where a few command and the rest obey. Freedom, then, doesn't mean isolating yourself from others. It means taking responsibility within the collective. To be free is to belong to a free people. The social contract is, above all, a belief in the possibility of a more just, participatory, and ethical world. Rousseau believed humanity could be renewed through reason, education, and collective will. It's not enough to live. In a society, we must actively shape it every day with choices that protect everyone's freedom, not just a privileged few. I hope this list of books helped in some way to transform how you think, feel, and live. Each one has the power to open new doors within us, and maybe one of them was exactly what you needed today. Now tell me, which of these books caught your attention the most? Have you read any of them, or did one make it onto your reading list? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. If this content resonated with you, give the video a like, share it with someone who loves philosophy or meaningful reads, and of course, stick around. There's so much more to explore here. Deep ideas, powerful authors, and thought-provoking reflections. See you in the next video, and remember, a good book is always a great place to start.